Hey guys, my name is Loco Doco, the better looking host of Listen Loco, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be episode 12 of Elitists United. And I'll just start the episode, Veteran, by pointing out that you have learned over the years. I'll give you credit for that, right? Loco, I mean, he's a fan of Star Wars. He is like fucking Anakin Skywalker at the end of the second prequel, because not only is he played by a terrible actor who apparently nobody likes, but people keep watching the shit. But also, he is also a slow learner, because I always tell Loco all the time, like, I just do it now on the air. I just start telling him stuff like, by the way, when you interview someone, don't ask them about it. So one of the things that I actually did tell you a while ago, Veteran, is it is really hard to get big name pro guests who also can fucking talk about the game or are actually interested. You know, it's real tough. Like, if you can do it, it's obviously the ideal. That would be the best guest you can have on a lot of shows. But the one people who will never fail you, Veteran, is people you already know can talk about the game. But the problem is they're probably not that famous, you know. So in this particular case, you've literally gone actually the route that Loco also does when he's in a jam, which is just get all of my old co-hosts and all my other guests from my shows. Like, you're just looking through my Rolodex. So anyway, this episode of Elitists United is just all the other people who come on my shows. So like, all right, Veteran, well done. You figured that one out. So it works. It does work. The other factor as well, and this is the other reason why these types of people, analysts, journalists, scene people, the other reason why they are also the best people to have on shows is because they are the only people who do actually build their whole life around being able to watch live League of Legends. And therefore, when you schedule with them, it's just easy as fuck. They're just like, yeah, these hours I'm available. Whereas like other people, you know, they're always like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing that day. So just for context for everyone out there, since people are going to make comments anyway, if Kelsey at all seems tired, it is actually 6 a.m. her time. It is. And this is the one time where it's actually all right for LS. It's like 10 o'clock at night for him or something. It's not, normally he's the one getting wrecked at like 6 in the morning. Not that there'd be any compassion for you, Alice. Like, I'm not saying that like anyone's going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I just wish they would, is all I'm going to say. So anyway, all I'm going to say at the beginning of the episode, right, before we start talking about MSI, is this. This is all I'm going to say. And this is mainly to Veteran and to LS. One, LS, at some point in this episode, I don't know how, but there is going to be a discussion about the infamous G2 playing Jinair, Green Wings, and KT. Just some minor discussion. Because this is obviously the group of people I want to see have that discussion, isn't it? Like, I ain't hating, I'm just saying it'd be interested. Secondly, this one is to Veteran. Veteran, I already got some warning signs before this episode is about to go live. So I have to address these, right?
Okay.
I don't want to hear any shit from you about how IG's like the best team by far. They're definitely going to win. Keep that same energy you had coming into this tournament, my boy. Keep that same energy about how good G2 was and the business style. You're riding the G2 train. Why would you jumping off it now? Like, you have to take it all the way to the fucking station. You can't jump off just because they lost to Vietnam, mate. America lost to Vietnam, the entire country. They still kept going, didn't they? They didn't just shut down in the fucking 80s. Would have been an interesting idea if they had. But, you know.
Don't wait.
Okay, go on, I'm just checking. I'm fucking hell of all the times to jump off. Like, right, so I know, isn't it? It's mental, isn't it? Like, they actually could beat a Korean team in a best of 5. He's going to jump off now after all the, like, you know, everyone's made ridiculous statements. You know, like, it's like if LS just came up now, like, yeah, actually, I would like to retract all former statements I've ever made publicly, and I will be taking the new role of Jat in the LCS and saying that everyone is good. So
I haven't let you down yet about this phone. Okay. I'm not going to do that now. Don't worry.
Good. No. So here's where we should start on this one, right? Whenever you do a group breakdown like this, my preferred style in general is there's a bazillion games. Some of them are going to be relevant, some of them aren't. It's better to just talk about the teams. You can't help when you talk about the teams, obviously addressing like a team that they played in a game and then talking about that team a little bit. But generally, do that if you want, but we'll try and go like team by team initially, and then we'll do the matchups. So if we talk, first of all, let's just start. It's Elitists United, Veteran. It's the EU show. Let's just start with the G2 discussion, shall we? Because I actually think if you look at the way the group went, overall, they're probably the most interesting teams since they had such an up-down, left-right. You never knew which fucking way they were going with some of these results. So, right, start us off, Veteran. What's your, like, if you had to give a grade to the group stage for G2, what would it be now? I'm guessing by the end of it, you know, you can take some marks off, be a little bit harsher. So what would you give them for the whole group stage?
I mean, for the whole group stage, I'd give them like a B minus. They have like a really interesting problem right now. when we were coming into the tournament, I was saying that the real strength that G2 had was in their mid-game setup, and this was largely based on the fact that I'd seen them take some pretty significant deficits, but through some very intelligent map play, even with worse scaling compositions relative to their opponents, they would somehow manage to pull it out.
Sure.
And I thought that this trend would continue. What happened is that I started to see how they played out these setups when they were ahead more often than not. And now it's gotten to the point where I realize that they play... okay, so right now, obviously, we're in like a solo lane meta. And Wonder is where a lot of the strength of G2 lies. But when they come into the mid game with a significant lead on Wonder, they seem to spend it all on map setups playing away from him and also giving up a lot of the tempo that they had accrued in their early game. And this is a really worrying trend sometimes. Like the IG game comes into mind for me after the whole Drake fight, for example. They set up the map properly to play around Wonder's tempo, but then they went this weird 3-1-1 setup. No, actually, wait, they sent Caps topside, and then they sent Jarvan there, and then they sent Tom Varus towards mid, and they leaned heavily towards topside. All Wonder could do was just clear Krugs towards bot side, and they were only behind in the map if they did this. This was literally the one decision that they could do that would put them behind in the map. And I think what they're doing is that they are tunneling on trying to make plays with Wonder's TP advantage, rather than make plays around the map relative to their actual win conditions. And this is the thing that worries me about G2, because they have a lot of strength in Wonder, and they seem to spend it in very strange ways. This is how they do it in the mid game. Once we end up, early to mid transition period, once we hit mid and mid to late game, they just tend to overgroup with him. And even in, we're not just talking second half of the tournament. In the first half of the tournament, the very first game versus SKT, he had like a 2-level lead, 3-level lead even over Khan that was almost completely spent in the mid game. And then once you hit the late game setups, this is where SKT is actually really, really strong. Sure. And if you're spending your lead like this completely unnecessarily, then either you change the way that you are setting up the map, you change the way that you are making your compositions, and you start playing how you are playing against Team Liquid against all other teams, or you go back to the drawing board and you start playing your compositions out properly, because you have a lot of strength in your solo lanes. That isn't the problem. It's your understanding of how to play out the map with leads that is the problem right now relative to Wonder.
Okay. Everyone else can jump in. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I completely.
Like, where did G2 go wrong? Because obviously they started the group so hot. You know, they looked amazing.
So I agree with Veteran. Their mid game, I think, is dumpster fire. I specifically remember getting into an argument with some people on Reddit about the Wonder thing. He left lane 2 levels up over Khan. I think level 11 to 9, and maybe Khan's a little bit deep into 9 or something. But it was after so much pressure and the massive CS advantage that Wonder had. Well, Khan hit 13 first, or Wonder hit it like maybe half a second first, but Wonder shouldn't have been in mid lane, I think, next to Perks or something, and Khan was just going to a wave that he should have been at anyway. How does that happen? How does a 2-level gap just completely fall by the wayside? But every other game I've watched of G2, I just did a VOD review of them versus Team Liquid yesterday even, and I hadn't seen the game.
This is the game they lost, right?
Yeah, this is the game they lost, and they just do so many arbitrary things that are so devoid of logic, and it's entirely based on, I mean, when I'm watching it, it's just what they want to do, rather than is it logical or not. Yeah,
you really think they're just doing something fun in the moment, or it's just an idea they came up with?
No, they have ideas of things to do, but it doesn't make it okay. Why are they so willing to take high variance plays that might have like a 60% success rate? Why not play differently, or like Veteran's talking about, set up the map differently so that you don't have to rely on these things to carry you through, or to mechanically outperform your opponents in situations, or to wait for your opponents to make a blunder. Because the game against Team Liquid, they were up a couple of thousand gold in an Infernal Drake, but Team Liquid was almost at the breaking point threshold where their champions aren't going to be touchable. And they're going to scale better, and G2 was in a bad state. And then Clid gets a bright idea to get locked up by Xayah. Teddy manages to get locked up, and then he
Wait a
goes
minute,
down.
you've confused two games here. You're talking about Team
No, I know. I'm
Liquid
talking about
versus
two
G2.
different games.
Right,
Right,
okay.
right.
This is the SKT game.
This is the SKT game.
Right,
and
okay,
it's
right, I see.
G2 gets these advantages,
Right.
and then yet the game comes full circle, and SKT is actually almost in a position where they're winning. And it was after such a horrendous early game for SKT. Which doesn't make any sense.
The really interesting thing about that first SKT game as well is I believe the matchup was Jace versus Silas, and if you're picking Silas, you're doing that very much with skirmishing and grouping in mind, but if the level disparity has become this, that's because you're playing in a situation where Silas is actually going to be incredibly useful. So it seems like you'd be wanting to pick SKT's draft if you wanted to do what G2 were doing at the time. And this is actually something that G2 had, like the first game versus Team Liquid. This is the other really interesting thing about G2 that I actually kind of like about them. They seem to change up their drafts dependent on their opponent, and I mean this in the sense of versus Team Liquid the first time, they picked a draft that was very bot heavy and was very strong at collapsing. And they basically said, we're going to match you where you are strongest, and we do not believe that even if you have, because they had Lucian Galio on the bot side, that if you do have priority in this lane that you're going to be able to play that out properly, we know that you're going to just group for Drake, and then we're going to collapse on you really easily with our Nautilus, Kaiser, etc. And they just had Wonder on Vlad duty top, taking the dick for most of the game until he would end up grouping with them. And if you want to play how they played, for example, against IG or against Fengvu, against these teams where they have given up their leads off of poor map setups, those map setups are suddenly actually quite good if you are playing out those kinds of composition. But those kinds of compositions they've only picked versus Team Liquid and Flash Wolves thus far. And I also, on the second Team Liquid performance, that performance was so bad, like so atrocious on an individual level, that I was watching with a bunch of EU challengers who legitimately were questioning if they were intentionally throwing the game so that Flash Wolves wouldn't qualify, so that they would have one swim partner who wouldn't leak. Like, legitimately, people were so dumbstruck by what they were doing, what was going on the screen, that they just assumed it was intentional. Like, that was a uniquely horrible performance on the final day that they did, to be honest.
I think also, it was like 20. I want to say 2017. Yeah, 2017. There was a lot of these conversations were going on about top lane and how top lane plays out the map in the mid to late game, and this feels very reminiscent of that, where there was like this really weird backwards notion where if you want to get Baron vision, you have to pull your top laner. Like, regardless of what your top laner is doing or what his purpose is, you have to pull your top laner from the side lane, go with him to around Baron and put wards down there. I feel like that's completely ignoring other methods that you can do, like using pressure to pull them to the top lane, getting some vision there, and then using the fact that they're split to get vision around Baron. Like, all these other types of execution, but it feels like when G2 are playing this tournament, they're reliably doing it. I don't know if it's just because of IG or what it is, because I feel like prior to this tournament, I felt like the way that G2 were approaching most of their match setups was really strong and was like much more thoughtful and much more fundamentally correct than the way that IG were doing it, because IG will just skirmish most of the time. So that's, and they won't get vision for their splitter. They'll just allow him to split and then try to see if he can 1v3, even if that's not an optimal setup. They'll overstay on a push bottom, like in the IGG2 game. They were basically ahead in tempo, and they were creating the correct map play by making G2 reset, but then they just stayed and took the fight because that's an IG thing. So I think this is like, this kind of like weird behavior it almost feels like G2 are trying to echo it, but they're not going to be as good at it, obviously, because it's one thing, it's bad, and two, they just don't play like that normally, I think.
You basically just described G2 when you were describing IG, except that Wonder plays pretty conservatively when they're playing away from him, but you shouldn't have to play conservatively in the points where they're doing this to him. So, I feel like they are just going for skirmishes now.
Beyond just like when they lost the really bad games towards the end, right? If you look at this tournament, G2's best games were pretty much all the games where they had the really unusual drafts and they had comps that obviously teams had never played against. So they had interactions between the champions that, you'd have to sort of like figure out during the game how they're going to use these. I mean, the best example is probably that SK Telecom, the first game where they played Pike top, and you could tell SK Telecom actually didn't understand what the concept G2 was going forwards, because they thought they were winning because they ganked their top lane, but obviously that didn't even matter in the game. Like, that was never gonna, they were never gonna have a 5v5 team fight at the end of the game. So if G2 were at their best doing all this stuff, like, is it not a worrying sign, or is there not something wrong if they can't, like, towards the end of the group, they start just drafting normal comps, Veteran? That's when they look the worst.
Okay, so the Pike game was the second game, and it feels like the reason that they picked Pike is because they're fully aware that Khan is going to make really poor decisions with his aggro, regardless of whether Clid is around his lane or not. And you could tell this by the fact that they kept permanently throwing their jungler top, no matter what, just hoping that at some point Clid was not there when Khan was playing as if Clid was there. And eventually they got him like twice, but the big thing that blew the game open wasn't even anything to do with that. That was when they decided, SKT decided to make a play in the red side jungle, basically 3v5 because Faker had no mana, was recalling off to the side, and Khan was still dead. I have no idea why they decided to make that play at all. But that was definitely one where I wouldn't necessarily say G2's strategy was a good strategy in isolation. It relied on a pretty piss-poor tendency from one of SKT's players to even do anything, and it wouldn't have even succeeded at that if SKT didn't have this really poor set of recalls and a decision based around that.
What do you think generally, though, about G2's, like, when they didn't play these unusual comps?
I mean, I think the best game that G2 had was the first game versus Origin, where they made that huge comeback with the worst scaling composition. I thought that was G2 at their best, to be honest. And I say that because obviously the fastest game that they had was like the funnel game wasn't the fastest game. The game after the funnel game was the fastest game. Yeah, the third game didn't have anything weird in it though, did it?
I don't think so. I think that was just normal comps.
So I think that whereas the weird comps are like the memorable thing about G2, I think they've shown some pretty significant performances outside of those, including their best performances, apparently both numerically and also in my personal opinion. I don't think that I think the first win that they got against SKT was more impressive than the second win they got against SKT, because I still really don't understand the point of the Pike pick unless you are just relying on Khan inting heavily up the lane perpetually, to be honest. Like, I VOD reviewed that game again, and it just seemed really fucking doomed if SKT play properly. So unless you're just relying on the fact that SKT do this every game, then it seems like pretty piss poor, and it wouldn't go in one of my best G2 games thing. They are a very intelligent team playing standard. They don't have to rely on this crazy stuff. I think they should in best of ones. I think if you can just throw them off in a best of one scenario, absolutely you fucking do it. You just guarantee the win that you think might be free anyway, but you just fucking secure it if you throw them off immediately. They've done all this prep for you and it doesn't even fucking matter. I think that's great in a best of one scenario, but I don't think that, I think saying that that's where they're strongest is a mischaracterization. They won those best of fives in Europe. They didn't lose a single game in any best of five in Europe at this iteration of the roster, based off of just being fundamentally strong about the game. So
I think G2 are at their best when they're transitioning from early to mid game, because I think that their understanding of kind of the early game win conditions is somewhat questionable at times. Like, even Fangbu had a really smart draft against them where they just sort of go, okay, we're going to basically draft ungankable lanes into your Camille effectively, and then G2 picked Camille LeBlanc, and then they had Lissandra, they had a Morgana. Also, Silas is not that easy to kill, so it was just like a very weird situation where Camille was looking for anything, and wasn't able to come away with a whole lot. Especially like picking Camille with Lissandra up, and obviously you can sort of forgive them because Lissandra isn't really as much of a champion on this patch. But this was a smart draft from PvP, and then they kept trying to force on mid. I remember this because obviously the LeBlanc Lissandra matchup is a bit volatile, but that's not really going to get you a whole lot. Also, when they pick, like, G2 have a really weird habit of when they pick bot lanes that are really reliant on level 6. So like Zyra Khan, Tom Kench champions like this, then they have a habit of almost like making sure Perks gets more XP and gets more solo XP. So they'll delay Mickey X's level 6 a lot, and they won't be able to make a transition to mid lane or anything like this. So I think that their early game has a lot of flaws, but they are pretty good at transitioning from early to mid game, and they're pretty good at making sure they're transitioning pressure across the map, like push out this lane, move to the next one, siege this tower, things, and making sure everyone is kind of getting XP at that point. So it's sort of strange to me, and keeping priority at that point and making sure their resets are on point. So it's really strange to me that they kind of are now falling apart in the late game or the mid game.
Okay. Right, LS, when you were talking about before and you listed like some of the losses, where do you actually come down on G2? Because obviously people are going to think from your comments before the tournament, like Team Liquid was the best Western team, that you must just like hate G2 or think they're not very good, right? Surely they, even at their best, they don't really fit in with your idealized way you model the game, right? So how do you actually break them down as a team, for good and for bad?
Well, I mean, I think the players are all individually fantastic for the most part. World level, they're all fantastic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the way that they play League of Legends is that great. I mean, I know you alluded to it earlier, but the KT Jenner comments in and of themselves, I mean, there's fantastic players on bottom LCK teams. There's fantastic players on bottom teams in every region.
By the way, just as an aside, I'll say this now. Everyone in the chat and everyone in this call can hear me. So everyone in here, right, would have laughed a bit when they heard that comment from LS. Yeah. What would you have laughed if someone had said Fongvu Buffalo would win twice against G2? Would you have laughed? Well, you would have been wrong.
Scenario, I wouldn't have been surprised.
So listen, I'm not saying I sided with him. I don't know why people implied I did on that episode. Didn't in any way. All I did is just say I didn't think it was like. I actually thought at the root of it, it had a grain of logic. Like I understood where it come from. You know, I personally didn't agree. I wouldn't pick Jin Air to beat G2, but it's not impossible, as you say. These things are not impossible.
Did you say that they would beat them, or did you say they would get relegated?
Well, the context.
He said both. Initially, he said that if KT or Jin Air
losing to Fongvu in the best of one, I think they could lose to KT.
Well, the problem with the other one is. The other one's like completely unfalsifiable, isn't it, Veteran? Like we can't know what the fuck would happen if G2 went and played in LCK. Like that like there's about 1,000 variables that come into play there before the first game even is played that we can't guess at. So that one's just an extended one where someone sort of pressed someone.
We either care about this or we don't. If
of course.
We care about this, then I think they could lose a best of one to either of those teams. I don't think they get relegated. That's why I wanted to clarify if he thinks they get relegated or if it's a best of one.
Okay.
I think they can end up in relegations. Because the bottom 4 teams of LCK were all in the running for it. I don't know why that's so ridiculous. I don't know why smirks come out or anything. I mean, we're literally talking about some world-class Korean players that can't carry their team. We're talking about teams with organizations and coaching staffs that have been to Worlds. We're talking about coaches that have brought teams up with rookies to phenomenal performances. We're talking about players that have multi-accounted Korean challenger, where there's been time and time again many boot campers that come here with Riot IDs. They can't do it. It's happened so many times. There was the thread about Caps getting stuck in D1 Masters. Yes, he might play weird in solo queue. Then he got Masters another time in his first short span of times. The reality is that this would never happen on other servers. The server's more difficult. So when we're talking about Korean professional players that can multi-account challenger with all these infrastructures and these staffs and these world-class players like fucking Ruler and Keen and whatnot, and their teams are ending up in relegations because the overall league is difficult, it's not preposterous to say that a team of equally world-class players could end up in relegations based on how they're playing the game and where their errors are coming up. I don't think it's that ludicrous. I really don't.
I don't think it has to do with the fact...
Go ahead, sorry.
I thought you were done, sorry. It's not the issue of how many world-class players they have for me. Like, that's not the thing about it that strikes me. It's because obviously, like, we can go into and debate how many world-class players we think Gen G have on their roster right now, like stuff like that. We can argue about all of that, but it has less to do with the level of talent the individual players have, and more to do with if they're able to kind of like play together. And I think that G2 have a pretty good grasp of just in general, like certain fundamentals of the game that I'm not seeing in these teams as well. Like Jin Air, do Jin Air know how to transition to any phase of the game? Like this is the real question that I ask when I watch them play. So I if they're already able to do that in, as you say, like an inferior server and an inferior context, then if they're able to actually make the transition and accept like certain like cultural differences, I don't see how G2 wouldn't be able to adapt or be able to make it out of bottom 4 or contest for relegations, as you're now saying now. Because like I think I just don't see a lot of redeemable factors in the way they're playing the game. And you're talking about gigantic staffs. Wasn't the whole like fallout and the big explosion to do with the fact that staffs and Korean players over times are complaining that their staffs aren't doing like as much as they want them to do? Wasn't that like a big blowout? You're talking about all of that as well. So I don't know like what the staff and the gigantic organization is actually contributing. So that would be my question mark as to like why you would have huge confidence in that aspect of them as well. So,
all right. So I guess to respond to that, G2 was in Veteran. You can correct me if I'm wrong because again, I only watched tidbits of EU. G2 throughout the split had instances of faltering, right? And now they're at MSI. They're performing very well. Koreans historically across games do perform better in their own environment. Thorin would know about this. And what I mean by that is foreigners would be able to take games off them in StarCraft and Warcraft and whatnot in international events.
Yes.
But every single time in GSL, OSL, whatever, you couldn't beat the Koreans.
Put it this way, in StarCraft, the best tournament in StarCraft 2, which obviously was a fully global game, was obviously GSL Code S. No foreigner has ever made the final of this tournament, ever, in like, we're talking like now, like a decade almost. So like everywhere else, there were tournaments, people beat the GSL champion if they were foreigner. I thought happened before, you know, so I'll just corroborate that. Anyway, keep going.
So basically what I'm alluding to is running the gauntlet against all the Korean teams over the duration of an entire split. And I agree with you that there can be fundamental issues with the staffs. I'm trying to say is that Korean teams this year, notably, lots of academy teams going on. There's multiple sister teams that almost every org has. Scrims are taken more serious because of the World's loss. And so, in a way, Spring was actually much more serious for Korean teams and whatnot. And even in the face of that, there was still so much struggling going on. From watching G2 selective games inside of Europe prior to MSI, I thought that there's a possibility they can end up in the same boat as Afrika or a team like that, which is fighting for relegations. And I don't think that's...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
What period in the split did you...
Before the finals.
Before the finals, just before the finals. Yes. So when G2 hadn't been scrimming for a month because their support player couldn't use his hands, and before they were able to get Promised Q in. They hadn't been able to.
It's actually unfortunate he didn't know that before, because that would be the ultimate reason to say they get relegated.
Did you not know about the Mickey X?
No, I know about Promised Q and Mickey's
Did you know that they couldn't
hand issues?
Yeah. Did you know that they haven't even scrimmed for this tournament? Because they haven't scrimmed for this tournament.
They didn't intend to use Mickey. Yes.
But they haven't scrimmed during this tournament at all, by the way. That's like inside info thing, but I do think that's relevant now.
That's weird. That they would, why did they say before then that they had scrimmed with him, like before the tournament?
They haven't scrimmed during the tournament.
Right.
During this tournament, they haven't done a single warm-up game, they haven't done a single scrim or anything like that. For 2 weeks before they got Promised Q in, they weren't able to scrim. They only had Mickey X and they weren't able to scrim before that. They brought in Promised Q specifically to start scrimming, but they didn't get to do anything with Mickey X. That's why their performance started dipping later on in the split. I also think that the idea that their performance is dipping, by the way, I don't necessarily think that automatically means that they would struggle to the point in Korea that they would end up in relegation. I don't really see the logic follow through there. I understand that if you start showing weakness, you could end up on a loss streak, but if they had a similar kind of win streak like they had in Europe, then they're not going to end up in relegation either. The point at which they started faltering, they had already secured first place outright. So it didn't even matter anything at all in Europe.
They had secured playoffs, and then Ocelot someone made the tweet that Mickey would be taking a rest because everything was secured and whatnot. But
one of the points LS basically made there that I think people might have missed is Actually, a point that I hadn't thought of myself is you can't just look at the teams in isolation. Like that, I mean, I notice people aren't doing the original discussions. We'll put that to the side at the moment. This isn't like if G2 was doing a boxing match and they knew in a month from now we played Jin Air Green Wings and a best of X, and we were going to prep for it and practice for it. We're all going to be at our best, and who would win that match? That's a completely separate issue. Actually, one aspect to LS's point, because I actually didn't agree initially with the relegation one entirely, and I don't generally, but one thing I will say gives it some credence is, remember, when you're playing an LCK and you play Jin Air Green Wings, that's the game you're giving the least attention to. That's the game you think is the gimme. You've just played fucking Damn One Gaming the week before, and then Kingzone the week before that, and then Griffin's coming up the week afterwards, and SK Telecom's 2 weeks afterwards. So, if anything, that would be the game that you've done the least prep for, the least practice. It's the one that you, in your mind, think is the breather. Like, unless you're some godlike team who can be 100% focused every game, actually, the games he's talking about would be the ones that immediately you'd be most likely to lose. Similarly, why I imagine G2 lost to Fongbu Buffalo twice. I imagine in their brains, I always tell people this, it's not that pro players don't try. It's that unless you are like one of these driven genius type killer instinct people who are very, very rare in life, you just can't make yourself try 100% in every game. If you go into a game and think to yourself, this team, this player is worse than me, I should win, how are they going to beat me? They can't beat me, I beat everyone worse than me, people who better than me beat me. In the hierarchy things, I should win. That's the game you are primed to lose, basically. And we see this happen many, many times. That's the reason I always thought SK Telecom lost to Flash Wolves. It's like, that was the only team of the other big ones they didn't really fear in any way. They always thought, of course we're going to fucking roll over this team.
If I take your entire scenario there as completely true, they wouldn't be in relegation when they're facing Jin Air, which is why the question matters so much.
Okay,
do you mean that they will drop to Jin Air for whatever external factors, or do you legitimately mean that they will be in relegation? If he means he'll be in relegation, then everything you just said, Thorin, doesn't actually matter. But I do see your point, and he could make that kind of argument that they were coming unprepared for them because they just came in prepared for all of these other top-tier teams. But that's a completely different statement to what I assume he was making, but you haven't actually said yet if you mean that they will get relegated or not.
No,
or even be in relegation.
So my memory might be a little bit wrong because the clip and the whole conversation of it started with me actually asking the Korean players what they thought who would win, and then I agreed with them after they had said it. And then I elaborated on my stream that I felt like they could easily end up in the same problem as Afrika Genji, which is just the bottom four. They could end up fighting for relegations, I believe was the exact phrasing that I used.
Okay, so they're a mid-tier team in Korea then.
Yeah,
by your estimation,
they could end up fighting. They could end up fighting for it, right? Well, I think the Korean environment plays a factor, and obviously, I'm basing this off of Warcraft and Starcraft.
Stylistically speaking, do you prefer the way that G2 play or the way that Griffin play? Because the way that Griffin were playing, So I didn't watch, like, you and me are probably in the same boat in regards to how much of Europe you watched and how much of Korea I watched this split. Mm-hmm. From looking at Griffin, people say SKT are like the wait to die team. Griffin legitimately just looked like they were taking dick non-stop until a poor play from the enemy, and then they capitalized off of that. Yep. Like, that seems like something you would eat for breakfast. Like, stylistically speaking, I would prefer G2 in a matchup versus Griffin for sure. For similar reasons why I actually think that they potentially would lose to it's potentially predictable that they would lose to a team like Fongfu, but we can get into that later. So do you think, would you favor Griffin or would you favor G2 in that setup?
Well, I mean, I think Griffin would win, but I agree with your notion that I think that they match up well. Okay. I think Griffin has really bad drafts. I think it's up there with SK Telecom when it comes to bad drafting. I think Griffin were bailed out by their superior team fighting multiple times throughout the split. They would, like you're saying, they would be getting bashed, they would be losing, they would be in bad map states, even if the gold indication or something doesn't suggest that they're losing. They are actually losing. And then they get bailed out. And for the team that was undefeated and beating everyone, to watch them play was actually a little bit weird at points. And then other times it would look really nice when they're not losing and they transition well and they team fight as good as they do. I guess to compound onto this, though, I would want to say that teams like Sandbox and Hanwha Life and Kingzone and Damwon, I think that's actually why at certain points they could fare well against them, most notably Sandbox.
Yeah.
It's because when I actually think of Korean G2, I think of Sandbox.
Yes. Yeah. Makes
So,
sense.
I mean, you have Summit up in top lane, right? That's the equivalency of Wonder, I guess, and just the aggression that they come out with and the way that they try to play the game is really good.
Before we transition to talking about some of the other teams, let's talk then, address just a little bit then, Veteran, like the aspect that G2 did lose these games to Fongwu Buffalo, right? Is that on the one hand, like I say, to some degree, I put that in the category of like, those are the games on theory you can't be 100% up for, you know, you think you're going to win them, blah, blah, blah. But in light of how this tournament has gone stylistically, is that not a concern the way they lost these games? Like the first one especially, they just straight up were just losing the game over and over again.
The way Fongwu play out mid to late game, not early game, they are like a smarter version of Splice from everything that I've seen, in the sense that these guys are, you could argue, overgrouping, but they are actually doing it at pretty smart tempo windows. And as a result, when G2 end up playing these poor map states that we discussed earlier, they are uniquely positioned to abuse that. Far more so than most other teams at this tournament. SKT don't look to do that kind of thing. It's more like what IG do, but kind of as 5. And rather than just like leave Shy off alone somewhere to actually get XP and stuff. Like that's more how I'd characterize Fongwu. I actually think stylistically speaking, that's one of the best ways you could try to play against G2. And I think that's why when G2 had their initial weaknesses towards the end of the regular split, Splice were actually able to take a game off them. It just took one poor transition and Splice were able to capitalize on that. So on the basis of this, I think Fongwu, stylistically speaking, would be good against G2, but the question of why G2 weren't able to just hard snowball on them, well, the first game, where you would think they would have the best shot at doing so, they actually played, this was like the only time I'd seen Shen support in like a long ass time. And they played that with Zeros, and Zeros is a really fucking strange player in the sense that this guy is like Khan, if Khan like did a line of coke just before every single game. Like he was always all in all the time, no matter what. But with Shen bot lane, eventually that doesn't actually matter so much. So the actual big strength that G2 normally have that they do sometimes waste mid to late game wasn't actually able to get off the road, and that seemed like a plan that was specifically designed both to shore up their weakness, which is the coin flip that is Zero's top, and also against the big strength of G2. So I actually really like that plan. But overall speaking, they're stylistically strong into their mid to late game, I feel like. So
yeah, I think the thing about Fongwu is that Fongwu have actually come in with pretty decent game plans, and they haven't been able to execute anything well because they just misplay almost everything. So if you're in a position where you're fighting like constantly picking fights, then you are going to be kind of a like I think the IG comparison is better than the Splice comparison, because I think that IG, I mean, while they will in 1-3-1 setups not set up vision for the Shy at all, they'll basically use TP to double TP scenarios to create team fight windows and win off of that in a lot of cases. Like that's a very LPL thing. So I see a lot of echoes of Fongwu in doing that. So yeah, I think that that's a fair comparison. I would say that it's funny because you think of G2 as like the solo lane centric team that is very kind of 1-3-1 focused and plays out like this. But I would say that every team that you would characterize like this at this tournament, so the like Fongwu, IG in particular, so obviously TL and Flash Wolves are the exceptions, right? And SKT is, I think, like they're more bot lane than top lane focused most of the time.
Sure.
Like they can mix it up depending on the situation, but I think they were getting more success towards the end of their split with bot lane. So I think that like G2 is having success against these teams, but teams that like play the way that they play, that you think of, they play out the map states better almost, or they understand like what to do better when it comes to mid to late game in those types of situations. So IG, even if GShu get a lead against ID like they did in like the Nico game, kind of through mid game, then IG can just take fights or collapse scenarios better and play out better from that position. I think Fungo is in a similar position.
What about some of the, before we go on to another team, what about some of the G2 players? Like, I personally, as a complete layman, I thought Perks was a bit underwhelming at times outside of the lane.
Oh.
Caps basically seemed to flip a coin before every game and either carry the game or fucking just do nothing. I just didn't, like, what do you think?
I mean, I
What's
think
the expert opinion?
Perks has undergone Sven syndrome, which I've talked about on the show before. But everyone who's not educated in Sven syndrome is heavily over prioritizing mid priority even in terrible situations in which to do so. Once you hit mid to late game setups, Sven was actually abused by SKT at a particular MSI. I remember.
2017, maybe the one that made the final.
I think it was like, yeah, no, it was that. Yeah, I have it seared into my head because the way that SKT were making map movements for their Drake priority, which was really fucking high for them, was that they always transitioned into a 5-man, then to a 4-1 on the opposite side of where they played beforehand, like really consistently. But then Sven would be fucking hitting mid tower when they were going to do this at a really predictable timing because they always did this, and then he would just get caught out and die. But he did this on in other iterations of G2 and continues to do it now on TSM. So I call it Sven syndrome, and Perks is now suffering from Sven syndrome in this tournament. It was pretty big in the Varus game. Was that against Fengvu? That might have been against Fengvu. Or was that against IG? Mm-hmm. It was against once. Mm-hmm. Okay. I just got a nod on both, so wherever, he's hinting all of them. So I noticed this. I also noticed that there was a point where it could definitely be known that Ning is transitioning towards the bot side of the map. That was Varus, yeah. With tempo over Jarvan, and yet him and Mickey still decided to take this opportunity to go for a ridiculously hard trade. And stuff like this, if stuff like that keeps going, then yeah, Perks is suddenly not having a good tournament at all, which is a shame because, especially in the first half of the tournament, I actually think he did a lot of pretty smart things in lane. Like,
is someone's alarm going off in the background, by the way?
It's not making
that sound.
There's construction.
Oh, never mind. Just keep going then. It's all right. Okay.
Oh yeah, in the first SKT game, for example, versus Teddy, I think he did some pretty intelligent things with the wave that really fucked over Teddy hard. That game was basically strictly 2v2 bot, like both Clid and Jankos were making significant plays towards the top side of the map and just abandoning bot side. So I do think he's still very intelligent about how he plays out his lane, but he has certain tendencies that needs to be dialed back and that he needs to like get rid of. And I don't know how much of that is nerves. He's not really the kind of player that has performed worse at like clutch events. If anything, he performs better on that. Like the final RNG game from last year was basically the Perks and Wonder show. But yeah, I would agree that if there was like a weak link right now individually, it would either be him or Caps, who turbo sprinted it down versus NA as fast as he possibly could. But if I remove that game out of my memory, then Perks is the one that I'm most worried about, because Caps seems to have gotten over whatever kind of thing he had against Rookie, for example. The last time he played against Rookie, he actually played quite well. He is still playing way more conservative than he did on Fnatic, and I don't know how much of that is the fact that the way that G2 seem to play, they basically figure we'll get bot priority, we'll transition that into mid priority, and then on that we will lean towards top side. Appears to be how they want to play out the game. And then if they do pick these compositions, which again only versus Flash on Team Liquid, where it's bot side, they dogmatically do that with Wonder relative to bot side. So I don't know if he's thinking that like, I have to wait until this point before I do this. Obviously, he wasn't thinking that against Jensen, but I don't know if he's thinking this or if there's something else going on there. But he's a lot more conservative now than he was beforehand, for sure. But he's being he has not been as much of a drag as he has become in a couple of games this tournament. Overall, I'm optimistic for him if we remove the turbo sprint.
Anyone else have any thoughts on any of the players in this vein?
And I'm worried about Wonder. Not
really?
performance-wise, but just like I don't know, doing what he's supposed to be doing, I guess, because there are just so many times in this game where it's like, why are you not bot? Why are you there? And just where he is there is kind of worrying. Like, I think it's not a coincidence that he lost a game where he got a pentakill, right? Like, I don't think that's a coincidence. Like, that was the game where I was like, okay, good, you're super ahead on Rise. If you just maintain, I don't think he went bot like the rest of that game. So it was really a weird situation.
The game was like 3 minutes long after he got the pentakill, though. No,
yeah.
But I do overall agree with you, because even when he got that pentakill, I don't think he should have been there in the first place. So
Probably.
I do definitely agree with overall.
I think he was in the right place before. Like, I think he was transitioning because they had to go through mid to secure vision and river so that he could sideline. So I think that's what they were setting up for, and that's why he was there. So that was not bad, but it was like, yeah, there was definitely a bad miscommunication on where he was supposed to be after that. So
I've got a general question actually that I'll link to this, and then we can easily transition to another team, obviously, when you hear the question, which is, right, coming into the tournament, I realise people always want like a pattern, and they want to say team A is similar to, and then pick another team you know as a reference point. It's a good approach to do, but I do feel like people went too far. Like, one of the problems people have when you reduce down information to make something simple for a fan, the problem is when you hand that to the fan, they don't know that they have to sort of add water to that, build it back up, add in the information, and then get the concept you're actually talking about. Like, the simplified version obviously means fuck all. It's just a very simple way to say it. So if coming into this tournament, people were like, look, G2 is like IG, and then later on, the PvB team is just like them as well. And then also on the other side, we have Flash Wolves and Team Liquid and SK Telecom. It's like only in the most broad sense possible. Like, yeah, if I had a gun to my head and I had to divide the 6 teams up into 2 groups, yes, that is how I would do it. But if you asked me how similar those teams are, I always thought coming into this tournament, like, people are way overblown the idea that like IG and G2 play the same way. Like, they really don't. Like, IG's not doing half the shit that like G2's doing in those fights. Like, they're just fighting. Like, they don't have some genius plan they came in with. So along those lines, right, if people look at how dominant the IG team was, right? If everyone still raves about how this is a meta where the solo laners are so strong, why did G2 try so many unconventional drafts? Like, with picks, like you're saying, like with some of the power picks out there, like Ryze, like Jace that are available, why not just pick these into your solo laners and just dominate the tournament, Kelsey? Why don't they just do that? More in the vein of what an IG might.
These champions are banned a lot. So, like, for example, if you're opening Jace, then your options into Jace are kind of like Ryze, Ornn, maybe something that just permanently fights against it and is able to absorb pressure from dives, because Jace is just, if you play Jace correctly, okay, and the top 3 teams at this tournament can play Jace correctly, then he's just going to get super far ahead in most cases. So I think that's kind of an issue, and I think Ryze was banned that game, so you're not going to pick Ryze in that scenario. And overall, it was just like these champions that you're talking about that just heavily dominate are, you can almost always get at least like a Nico or a Kennen or anything like that, and that's kind of what they go for, more or less. So I wouldn't say that they go for like unconventional drafts. I would just say that maybe they're not thinking all the time, and most of the power picks will be banned against them. So,
okay, right. If we talk now about IG, because I want to do like cross brackets so that we don't accidentally just do the whole thing, and then we'll do the SKT versus G2 towards the end, etc., etc.
Can I
point Veteran? Yeah. Right, if you want, yeah, sure.
Yeah, 1 sec.
We'll just cut this out the VOD. There's no point.
Yeah.
Actually, no, wait a second. Let me think. We can keep talking about him. Whatever. We'll keep going. Right, LS. What do you think on this aspect? Because I'm kind of torn, like on how G2 drafted, because I'm kind of torn. Like, when I first saw them do all those creative drafts, obviously when it works, it looks fucking amazing. So you're like, oh, they're geniuses. They just know something about the game nobody else does. Which is like, I don't personally really buy that, because I have to say, I don't think you could execute 90% of the shit they're doing if you had even just 2 out of the 5 players they have. Like, I think you've got to have all those players with a similar mindset. Super insanely good players who've been solo carries. Like, there's a million factors have to come into play. So I actually naively thought to myself, why don't they just play standard? And then I saw them play standard. I was like, Jesus, go back, do the other shit. Like, What do you think, LS, on this? I think, Kelsey, either way.
Hold on.
I was just going to ask, other than the Pike draft, which draft do you think was super unconventional?
Wait a minute. They played Nico AD carry for a start off.
I mean, that's not that weird. I think.
Who else is playing that? Who in LPL plays that? It was good.
Actually, it was probably more common in LPL.
Yeah, so who plays it was good?
Uzi, I played it. So
the best player in the world. Okay, yeah, there's one. Right.
I mean,
that's actually an argument against it, but okay. Only the best player in the world plays it. It's actually a pretty good argument against it, to be fair. It's a bit like,
works.
I mean, well, that's absolutely how it works, Veteran. The better players have more leeway to play.
Draft, I think it made more sense to put Nico top in that particular draft, but
well, that's what actually SK Telecom thought they were going to do. You could tell.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't go Nico top and Vayne bot in that particular game. Like that was kind of weird to me. But I think Nico AD carry in and of itself isn't conventional.
I would say like that's unfair. Come on, like what? So you're only going on. So an entire draft is only unconventional based on each individual pick. I thought there was a concept called comps, Kelsey. You think these comps are all normal?
I don't. Are they?
Right, go on then. We'll be
our
assholes and run through every draft, and you tell me all the LPL teams who played these 5 champions. You'll never find a single draft where they played this.
LPL team to play it. Like the basics of the, if you're just talking about the basic of the comp, most of their comps are 1-3-1 comps. Like,
right. I've learned when there's something called a dead end, so we'll back out of that dead end. Kelsey doesn't want to talk about that topic. LS, did you have any thoughts on this? Yeah, still going. You got any thoughts on this, LS?
Well, I mean, I think that some of their drafts were just really outright bad, right? I think the Vayne one was terrible. I think that was a dumpster fire. That was absolutely a dumpster fire.
I can easily saved by the way. Varus spot. Like Varus wasn't banned at that point, right?
No, Varus wasn't banned, and they have Vladimir, Nico, Vayne, and then J4 and Tom. And
I don't think
the J4 Tom rotation I really dislike. I'm sorry.
So wait a minute. They played they played Vayne top, and then 2 other champions you don't particularly like. So the 3 out of the 5 champions we've just taken off the map, and that's not an unconventional. Like whatever. You know what? I've learned not to go down these fucking digressions. Keep going, LS. Keep going, LS.
Piss him off.
It's a 1-3-1 comp. It's a 1-3-1 comp. How is that unconventional? Okay.
Maybe that's what you tell your players. Like, unconventional doesn't mean nobody plays 1-3-1. Like, that's the most ridiculous reduction I've ever heard.
I mean, these are not. I don't think these.
So in a draft, you aren't bothered by the specific picks of a draft.
You're saying that they were good when they were playing unconventional drafts, but they were bad when they were playing like standard. But that draft was so bad, and that game was so bad, and that game was awful. The one game that they were good, where they quote unquote played an unconventional thing, was the Pike game. Like everything else was, I feel like all their drafts were really standard. So
just want to say why that draft won't work if you just put Vayne bot and Nico top is because you need the Vayne to be able to side lane later on, but you're putting her in a fucking garbage matchup. And then you can't 1-3-1 with her, so you can't just transition her into side, because Nico is going to be able to hold the 1-3-1 way better than Vayne is, but then Vayne's not going to be able to match up versus the Akali, so I think you just put Varus there and just let Nico push against the Akali permanently for the rest of the game, and then I think the draft actually works. And so it's just one pick, and I think you save the fucking draft. But if you have Vayne bot, then you have terrible options mid to late game, no matter what. Because yes, Nico will still be able to split, but you'd much prefer her in the 1-3-1 matching the Zyra Khan, and then have a split push option. But you don't have that option anymore, even though the pick itself is good. So like, I just pick Varus, put Nico top. Draft is saved. Job done. I agree the Jarvan and Tom rotation that they are always going for is dis-synergetic. And Jarvan Braum, I assume, is what you said is better. But yeah.
And I didn't say that, but yes, I think Jarvan Braum is better. I don't know if Braum is like that good, but
I mean, Koreans think he is. They still fucking love that shit. So, right, let's talk about SK Telecom now. Actually, we will do the matchup. So we'll just talk about SK Telecom for a bit, then we'll do the matchup, and then we can put those 2 teams to the side and do the others. So, right, LS, start us off. Coming into this tournament, I noticed that everyone now claims IG is the best, blah, blah, blah. I noticed a lot of people who follow the Korean scene heavily still, like, some of them publicly were saying that SK Telecom was going to be really good, like they could still be the best maybe, like, you know, like obviously there was a lot of mental gymnastics of like, you know, maybe their style somehow works in their region and they'll be able to translate it, and it doesn't matter that they're not playing the same way the other teams are. What have you thought overall in the group stage? Obviously they were losing early, by the end they won a lot. What's your take on SKT? Is this the SKT that was supposed to come?
Well, two of SK Telecom's losses were with a big question mark of why the fuck are you putting Teddy on Sona and MF?
Yes.
You
in theory, the best ADC in the whole tournament.
Right.
And you want to play through bot.
The best AD carry in the whole tournament, who is renowned for his insane mechanics. Honestly, in Korea, I would probably say the only ADC that is better than him in Korea is Deft and only on Ezreal. I think any other day of the week, you take Teddy on any other AD carry. Why the fuck was he on Sona? Why the fuck was he on Misfortune? Why does SK Telecom draft the way that they do? I swear to God, it's like some sort of fucked up sadism, masochism, BDSM type shit where they just want to draft as bad as they possibly can to see if their players can still just carry them through it.
I mean, you can't blame that entire game on just Sona. Like, I don't think it's possible.
Right, but
yeah.
Why? Right?
I mean,
like,
I agree, like, why, but I think a lot of people are fixating on this as, like, an explanation as to why they lost those games, when I don't think either of those games were lost on AD picks. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. But I think that it continues the worrying trend for SKT, where, much like Griffin, they have very weird drafts. They either are very, very slow, or when they try something innovative, it's really mistimed. It doesn't matter if Sonataric's really good, if it's not good for SKT. Them picking it's weird. The MF thing is sort of a flavor of the month right now, or at least it was for the past month, Misfortune, and scrims and whatnot, so that comes out. But I think that some of their losses are really bizarre. I think their win over IG was also actually really weak, and I think that the way that they started recalibrating their drafts is also concerning, because I feel like I'm watching a team that's stuck in February or March, because they're going back to old cookie cutter type team comps. They're putting Teddy on Callista with her trinity of supports, the Galio, Tom, Alistar, and then Braum. I don't know. SKT does not look that comfortable in the tournament, and I think that they're actually performing worse than what many people who avidly watched Korea expected, because they had a second wind in the second round robin in LCK, where they went from being a middle of the pack team to convincingly looking like the best team in LCK, and actually improving week after week. So I don't know. I'm not impressed with them up until this point, but I still think that they win their next best of 5. Don't know if they win the whole tournament.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You were really disappointed in SKT in playoffs as well, right? Like the SKT Kingzone series.
After that match, yes.
You guys were predicting Griffin to win mostly because SKT looked like shit, right?
SKT looked vulnerable against Kingzone, which was startling because they had looked so powerful leading up to that match. But then against Griffin tried the Pantheon Talia 2 games, and Griffin just didn't look like they could ever get any footing. Yeah.
And SKT's like I didn't feel like either of SKT's playoff series were super convincing to me. They showed pretty strong fundamentals in like post mid game, but everything else is like, okay, Griffin are wasting time, so SKT can also opt into wasting time because they have better scaling. Like stuff like this kept happening in the early game. So to me, I wasn't that convinced by SKT. I think that they did show some smart things, and they had like pretty good, quick, reactive decision making in the second half of the round robin, as you say. But that was also kind of dotted by Griffin playing worse in the second round robin. That was also dotted by, I think, Kingzone's climb felt really kind of almost disingenuous to me at times. Just because I think it's like they found a very specific way to play regarding Deft, and then Pawn like always has his champions that he can go to, and so that was always an exploitable aspect of their team play as well. So to me, like, SKT wasn't ever a super convincing team to me coming into this tournament. I thought that they might have a good matchup against G2, but then obviously they got pretty destroyed just by making, in my opinion, questionable calls, like really questionable map plays. So
I actually want to come off that to say that the point at which the SKT IG game that SKT won swung significantly into SKT's favor was on that Drake contest, and IG opt to contest that when SKT have such really strong pull-off, despite the fact that both Xin and Zoe aren't in range of them and Silas hasn't actually reset yet. Like, it was a terrible situation, which to do that, you're doing that without your key members actually on the map to contest, and you're doing it almost blind. I've only seen one other team fuck up that badly, and that was SKT themselves versus G2 at this tournament. And I have not seen G2 go for this kind of thing, because I think G2 actually understand when they can and can't go for these kinds of contests. I don't think SKT will find the same windows that they found versus IG, which SKT actually prefer to go for. I do worry for G2 when it comes to IG, but versus SKT, I actually think they're still stylistically very strong against them, because when SKT try to match their skirmishing early, they find that they don't have a strong an understanding of it, and they end up with the same mistakes that IG do. IG do it out of desperation. I think SKT do it because SKT have never actually tried to play this kind of style. SKT hold map states really, really well. Like, that's the defining thing about SKT for me, and that's the thing that they've at least done well this whole tournament. That's not really the way that the game is played anymore, but any time that they try to match G2 or IG's aggression in this sense, I feel like they'll always be at a disadvantage. You can force IG into almost desperation moves, because IG will just want to take a fight no matter what, even if it's a bad thing. But when it's coming from SKT, I think it's just an experience, and it's not experience that they're going to get before the G2 series. I'm still fairly confident that while they're trying to hold map states, they'll feel the pressure and they'll try to do something, and I think G2 perform significantly better in playoff games than they do in regular split. So I'm really not worried about G2 versus SKT, to be honest. Like, I'd still predict them to win that. I'm only really worried about them versus IG.
Were you impressed, though, that SKT was basically literally able to just completely change the start as the group stage went on? I mean, they obviously had the players to do it in theory, but
I don't think they did. I'd question them. I don't think they did at all. I think
they
IG
did, so they didn't
G2,
change their style at all.
I think IG and G2, no. I mean, when you see them pull out Sona, Taric, MF, and all of this stuff, do you think they're playing for bot, or are they playing for solo lanes? They've been playing for solo lanes the whole time. And if the argument is that they suddenly changed their style towards the end because their solo lanes were suddenly doing well, I completely disagree with that. Khan was actually getting obliterated. They traded a lot from Khan onto Faker, and they basically did a pretty similar set of rotations that G2 do, but this is the exact same set of rotations that I am describing from 2017 SKT. They haven't changed at all. I just think that it worked once against IG because IG did a horrible piss poor play that I would ordinarily expect to see from SK Telecom, given how this tournament has gone. So I completely disagree with the notion that they've actually changed up their style, that they've adapted significantly. I think G2 and IG had a terrible final day.
I think, I don't know if IG had a terrible final day. The Flash Wolves game
they finally lost.
Is an entire thing. I think that their game against SKT was really weird to me, because usually what I praise IG for is just understanding their early game win conditions really well, and so I was confused when I thought that the split map opportunity was really, really open for them, and then they didn't take it, and instead they spend time trying to do like a level 2 dive versus a Rise when it makes sense for Jarvan to transition from bots. So it was just like these weird decisions that IG were making super early on felt more like, this game more than anything just felt more like a loss from IG than a win from SKT. Yes. So to me, just SKT were kind of given a lot of advantages early. So when it did get to that dragon fight that you talked about, like, they were in a good position, even though IG were technically slightly ahead in gold. So
I think they were also ahead where it mattered, though, because the way that the top lane was going was so poor for SKT that I think Khan used the windows that he could to roam really properly, which is a far cry from what I could say about his teleports. But they were able to set up that Drake at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Chi didn't eat the last wave, which then causes 2.5 waves to come back in, he just teleports to the dragon. SKT can't win.
Oh, I think Zoe and Xin were also way too far away to go for the contest when they did. The angle that Jackie Love and Baolan, please tell me I got that name right and didn't butcher it, were coming in at the Drake from, I think they get turned off onto very easily. I don't think Zoe gets there in time. I may be wrong. You can go back and check, but I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure watching it that both Xin and Zoe were very late on the contest as well. I have it in my head that Xin is coming out of base and is in the fucking corridor out of the gate when the turn-off happens. When the turn-off starts.
This whole thing is... so Silas could have already been recalled, and Mountain Drake still had 20 seconds to spawn.
Fuck it, I'm pulling it up as well.
Yeah. He pushes one final wave. Xin Zhao is recalling. Zoe's in front of her turret. Galio and Kaiser near the blast cone. Scuttle's about to come up, but it's already at a point where Silas already could just be recalled.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that I think even if he does that, there's still Xin and Zoe are too delayed.
Alternatively, I think that they don't even need to take the Drake. Like, it doesn't do a whole lot for them, and if they want to keep Silas pushing at the top, I think that's actually maybe even better for them. So, yeah, because they're keeping full control over this top side anyway, and they have they both have Mountain Drakes. And basically, you're putting if SKT want to like force bait by having a Mountain Drake, which is what they do, like bait around Baron by having a Mountain Drake, then they're basically forcing IG into a situation where their comp is like happier anyway, because they have a really, really skirmish heavy comp, and like the answer that SKT have is obviously Kennen flank, and I think in this game Kennen does have probably one of the best flanks I've ever seen Khan make. Like, I don't think that's normally one of Khan's strengths, so they do have that, but normally I wouldn't necessarily rely on them to do that super well, and I think that IG have better tools for like forcing with Zen, with Galio, with their own Kennen flank because they have Silas, etc. So,
just to put this quick thing to bed, I don't know if you guys can see my screen share, but Xin is here. Silas could already have TP'd actually ages ago. He's actually on first tier before before this whole play happens. Zoe is there, but the turn-off's already happened. They're already fucked. Like, even if Silas is here well earlier, Xin is too far away and Zoe wouldn't get there in time. So.
Yeah, but look at why Xin recalls. Look at his items before the recall and then after. Because he didn't need to
no, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that they can't go for the contest. And I think even if Silas recalls...
They can't go for it because of how they played it out, but in theory, IG should never lose position to that Drake, and they shouldn't have to lose it. I agree with Kelsey, it's not imperative that they capture that dragon. Likewise, it wasn't also crucial for them to get the ocean dragon. And I think that... I don't think that it's... I actually think that I don't know. SKT winning that game was not them winning it. I really feel it's IG just losing it.
Yeah, it was. I don't think anyone would disagree with you on that. And this is also why I think I'm not really worried about G2 if they make the necessary adaptations, which hopefully they will, because I just got 2 additional analysts on here to basically tell them what they're doing wrong and what IG are doing wrong. So hopefully they just watch this VOD and we're all good. What
about the SKT solo laners, Khan and Faker? What do people think about their performance?
Khan, okay, actually, no, you're the career guy, go for it.
I think Faker was on an island against IG. He won the trade really, really hard at level 1 against Zoe, considering teleport. But then he got into really bad spots due to the mana and not having teleport, but I think that he actually salvaged the lane state relatively well, especially considering it's against Rookie. Even though Rookie had control over most of the lane in terms of priority and dictatorship, I think that Faker was actually doing reasonably well. I think he lane kingdomed a couple of times so far in the tournament. I mean, laning is not really his issue. Khan is Khan's kind of weird because even in LCK, there were several points I remember casting where I was actually attributing him to being the weak link on SK Telecom at certain points. And I actually still think that if there's any member of SK Telecom that can falter or can have a poor performance day, it would be Khan.
So my feeling about Khan is that the one thing Khan is like really good at is that he's very good at using EP to accrue a level advantage, which makes him really strong on champions where they're all in at 6 is disgusting, which makes him a Fiora main, basically. And like most Fiora mains, his understanding of how to use his teleport for flanking opportunities is completely fucking garbage. But to me, that's always being like what Khan's being really good at, what Khan hasn't been so good at. And the problem is, his big problem is his over-aggressive tendency. There's so many times where he just starts hitting turret and going for plating with Clid nowhere near that G2 could go for a pick like Pike and actually expect it to work out, because that's literally the only scenario in which the Pike pick's going to work out is if you are actually able to engage upon him under the turret, and that's basically it. There are also other champions that theoretically do it better, but they're essentially relying on this tendency from Khan. And honestly, watching that game, it seems like that's a good tendency to go for. What they couldn't really rely on was what Clid was doing. Clid's actually played a lot better this tournament relative to his top laner, so they didn't have as many opportunities as I feel like they thought they would have. But this seems to be the thinking there, and I think it's worth. I think it's a really good way to think about Khan and play against him. And I think if they come in with the same mindset, I think Khan's going to keep doing this because he's done this ever since he first came on the scene 2 years ago. To be honest, it just hasn't been abused yet.
Thoughts, Kelsey?
I mean, I've made several comments on several other shows that Veteran may have watched where I talked about Khan being bad at TV flanks. So there you go.
Yeah.
Is that it? So this is like a fucking comic book from 1969 and we're supposed to go to episode 4
One
of the
thing I will
Fantastic Four.
say, I actually feel like Khan has been playing better at MSI than domestically. So that can give you a picture of that, because like going back to the G2 SKT game, like the second one where he was playing Jace, I would maybe say that one of his deaths was his fault. The first death, I think that for sure, it was either the first or the second death, for sure, Clid should have been near his lane. Like, Clid basically goes bot for a Krugs camp, I think, instead of pressuring around the top side. And then when he dies after that, the fact that SKT are doing that invade and then Pike gets the triple, like, that had nothing to do with Khan. So I would say that wasn't necessarily Khan's fault. And that I actually think he played really well in the Ken game overall. So, yeah, I think Khan's been playing this better this tournament than I expected. Definitely better than he did at the last MSI, if we recall when he was on, what was the team called
Kingzone,
then? Was it
Dragon X.
Kingzone already? Yeah. I just like,
Longzoo,
they've gone through so many they've gone through a few names, so.
Yeah.
What about Faker? Any thoughts on him?
He is performing really, really well at the tournament. I don't understand. Okay, so I heard that like Raz was getting a lot of shit for putting him in the top 5. I was unaware that that's like a controversial opinion now, but he definitely.
As far as I know, I think it was only Froscorian who was on the desk who gave him like some stick for it or whatever. I'm not really sure what her. I can't remember what her reason was.
5?
They
did like a top 5.
5 players in the
Is that MSI? Yeah.
Is there an article or is that
for it? No,
it was on the desk.
It was a desk segment.
okay.
Okay, apparently it's a really controversial thing to put Faker on that list now.
Hi, Rookie. Teddy.
Sure. I mean, the
Everyone
one part
is
I would
putting
say
Jackie
about
Love number 1. Are you triggered, Ellis?
the real problem with that topic
Jackie
of like,
Love.
if you're trying to do
What?
top 5 players is
I'm triggered now.
right. We'll get to that in a second. But the real problem with doing one of those lists is like the reason it doesn't work in League of Legends is because this is the only time they all play each other. So no one defines what the list is supposed to be. Like, is the list supposed to be top 5 players in the world, like, before this tournament began? If it was, then maybe it's debatable whether Faker should be on that list, because actually, like, if you look at how he played in Korea, he didn't even really become, like, much of a carry threat till the playoffs. But if it's supposed to be, like, top 5 players at this tournament, that's why I always thought the League of Legends 20 at Worlds or whatever was always flawed, because they never defined this at the beginning. If it's supposed to be top 5 players at the tournament, well, Historically, Faker's a fucking amazing international player. Meanwhile, other players either have never been international, or maybe someone like Khan, for example, tends to get way worse internationally. So, like, that's where I think that whole discussion went awry. Like, 99% of the time, debates like that is just like the analysts haven't defined their actual position. So they're like, you think this? It's like, well, no, actually, if you'd listened to what they think, like, you'd know already. So, whatever. That's one side.
Okay, how about this though? Because there is this idea that like Faker becomes a character and stuff like that, like you said, but there's like also a much more pervasive idea that he's somehow being held back by the playstyles that SKT choose to opt into and have always chosen to opt into, by the champions that he picks. And I don't know why people have this kind of disconnect that isn't actually Faker's style. That isn't actually how
as far as I can tell, Veteran, I would agree with you. If you look at the history of SK Telecom and how many different players they've had and how seemingly the coaching staff obviously cares what Faker thinks, and over the years we found out he is one of the main shot calling voices, it seems way more likely. This is the reason why I always criticise Bjergsen in TSM. What are the odds Bjergsen is influencing TSM style of play for the last half a decade? Of course he is! He's the fucking main player. So the idea at the end, you can go, tell you what, that Bjergsen was fucking hard done by, wasn't he? Why didn't they just get him a jungler? It's like, who do you think it was ruining the junglers? It was fucking him, you idiots! Think it through. He's the only one who was there. He was the only connecting factor. Do you know how it works? Like fucking common denominator. So I would agree, Veteran. Like that angle doesn't really make sense. Like because people do mental gymnastics to then give Faker like twice the credit. It's like when Faker played Rise when that was no one else played that at Worlds like 4 years ago. That's because he wanted to. He probably thought that was the best pick, and he actually showed it. He didn't do it like because they made him do it. Why would you do that if you had the best player in the world? Why would you make him play worse and then win the tournament and then say the coach did the wrong choice? Come on, fans are so weird on some shit. They are on some shit.
Where I was going with it was like, because I do actually completely agree with everything that you're saying right now. Like, I think that is a really big point. That isn't like the point I was
fair enough.
The point that I was trying to make is that when I think about all the times that Faker's quote unquote popped off at international events throughout the years, he hasn't gone like 404 in lane. He has gone like 001 in lane, and then he's gone 404 after stuff like, for example, that turn at Drake that IG made. Like, he does make really strong, like really flashy plays and really strong mechanical outplays and stuff, but he hasn't, and he does play his lane out really, really well. But people seem to have this idea in their head that when Faker has a 606 scoreline at the end of the game, that somehow they've seen that season 3 perpetually solo killing monster carry, that somehow has reappeared. But every time SKT is, or every time Faker has had one of these pop-off games, it's because SKT as a whole, and this playstyle that Faker has been advocating for years and years, has actually worked. I don't think this takes away from any claim that he has ever had to being the best player in the world, or even the potential claim that he's the best of all time. Like, I think this style has worked for him. I think he facilitates this style really, really well, and I think he has had some really strong games with this style in mind. But I think the Season 3 Faker that people seem to think occasionally appears back in international competition has never actually appeared back. I can even think of like periods when SKT were doing really, really poorly this split, where you'd still see highlight plays from Faker. I think it's always been this way ever since after Season 3, and he realized that this was kind of a more consistent way to play out the game. And I still think he's the best in the world, but I think that just this idea of him as the fucking hard carry solo killer Season 3 is just an idea, and I don't think it has actually existed for a long time, even when he has played at his absolute best.
I mean, there's a reason why people make these top. It's hilarious. People say make top 10 plays made at MSI. I was looking at the score video and I pull it up. It's like, okay, I'm not expecting a whole lot, but what's this? It's like 5 Faker solo kills in a row. It's like at a point you just fucking move on. Like, Faker getting solo killed in lane is not the thing that makes Faker good. Like, Faker being able to 1v1 people is not what makes Faker good. And even so, like, almost consistently, his lane was just played well. Yeah. And like, if you look at the first IG-SKT game, not even the second one, he was up pretty consistently. The first IG, or maybe it was the G2 game, but he was up like pretty extensively in that game. But they weren't able to transition his advantage into anything, which, is partly on him. But I mean, when the rest of your side lanes are just kind of falling apart, that it's a little bit more difficult to make a mid lane advantage on something like Azir, which isn't going to be perma roaming or anything, count for anything.
What do you think about that then, since you just referenced it directly? Obviously, one of the elements that make people think SKT still thought they were going to be getting to late game and having all these strengths they showed in Korea was they played 3 games of Azir. What do you think of this as a pick in the current meta?
The Azir is just out of left field. And in March and April, scrims with Korean teams, the mid lane meta dried up so much because people were so sick and tired of what was the Holy Trinity? It was Ryze, Lissandra, Zoe. I think that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so eventually some bright bulbs were like, oh, we're going to play Azir. And then they didn't realize that they don't have the hands to play him. But then in addition to that, he's just not that good of a champion. I have no idea where this notion of Azir comes from, because obviously there's been about a month time period between MSI and the season ending. But I know that a lot of people were trying to make Azir work towards the end of March and in early April. But it always just looks so terrible.
It allows you to do a 1-1-3 composition whereby you will neutralize their fucking hard snowballing top laner, which is a thing that started happening really late on in the split. People were picking because they really like going into the 1-1-3, but if you are too far behind in bot lane, you can still transition to an obscenely safe 1-3-1. Which, like, that was what they were trying to do in the first game versus G2, for example. Like, I think they wanted to go 1-1-3 to counter the Jace. They were going to put a Tabi, Iceborne Gauntlet, Ezreal with a 3-man top side. They were just going to plant Faker mid on wave clear duty, and they were going to plant Calm bot side, and they were just going to try to counter Jace that way. And that would have worked out if obviously their bot lane didn't get hard outplayed that game. So then they have a really safe 1-3-1 that they can go back to. So I think it's just because of the rise of the 1-1-3 as a response to this solo lane centric meta that happened towards the end of the regular split.
I also think Azir plays fairly well into Ryze early, so they knew that Ryze was going to be a dominant pick, and that's what they wanted to get out of it, I think. Basically, Ryze will side lane, but then Azir will potentially team fight better, so there's also an answer to Ryze in the mid to late game then. But I think it ended just didn't have kind of the map presence that you want when you're breaking open the lane, the first tier turrets earlier, like, because that ended up being a really big part of this meta, is that how early you're getting platings, how early you're making all these turrets fall, and so then you have an open map state, and then kind of like, what do you do with Azir until he gets his 2-3 items? So
right, if we do the matchup then, SK Telecom versus G2 in a best of 5. So start me off. Come on, the veteran. Let's see where you are first on this one. You've talked yourself back into G2 winning if you listen to the opinions you said earlier. So G2's going to win this series?
I myself out of it. Okay. I mean, like, the
veteran, come on.
Like,
here's my question for you, veteran. Like, this isn't like a massive topic, so let's not make it a big thing. But, like, the reason why I say that is because, come on, when Team Liquid beat G2, that must have shook you a little bit inside.
Caps turbo ran it down. He turbo ran it down.
And that can happen. This is one of the problems, veteran. You're not like, imagine a Korean fan just saying like, "Oh, well, whenever my team loses, like that doesn't count because this player like fucked the game." Like, no, they're all just players.
Like, if it was way more consistent. Sure. Than just one time on the last game of the day, or not the last game of the day, but on the last game of the tournament for them, when I know they haven't been able to scrim for the duration of the tournament, like, I think they'll refresh. I think they'll mentally refresh. I think they have a good understanding of where SKT are weak as displayed by that Pyke pick. Like, I actually think they understand the weaknesses of SKT. I think SKT understand as well and showed them in the first game by trying to opt into this 1-1-3 setup that they actually know where they are weak as well. I don't think they have a solution for that based on like any form of standard play. And I think that the mistakes that SKT have made versus them versus G2, they have made at the periods where G2 are historically really strong in. They didn't start showing that at certain parts in this tournament, and we have gone over those themes. But historically speaking, they have, and this is clearly an area of the game that they focus on really well. So I actually do trust them to get over that. And even with those kinds of issues, they were still able to take games over SKT. Obviously, there's the argument that SKT are way stronger in best of fives, but I just want to throw out GT are also way stronger in best of fives than they were at any point in the regular split. So I really do trust them in this scenario. I think they have already figured SKT out, and I think the tendencies SKT are bad that are systematic tendencies on the team level or on the individualistic level when it comes to players like Khan are tendencies he's shown for years and years and aren't going to vanish anytime soon.
What do you think, LS?
In regards to SK Telecom, there was some interesting stat about Faker in series that I remember seeing before LCK finals.
What was the gist of it?
I mean, SK Telecom doesn't really tend to lose in series, right? Historically.
Sure.
I mean, we're not just talking about G2, which is a recent team in the last, this rendition, right, is this split. And then even going into the past G2, where we're literally talking about an era of Korea. Yes. I think most of Faker's losses come from one series or something in a series thing. Do you know what I'm wording this poorly?
In a best of 5 or a best of 3.
Yeah, best of 5 or a best of 3. I think the majority of his losses actually only come from one of those series. It was something. Okay. It was one of those stat lines. Like, obviously, they just 3-0'd Griffin in the most recent LCK finals. But it's some absurd stat where his record is just absolutely bonkers. And I think that's actually something a little bit special about SK Telecom is them in a prepared environment, in a prepared setting. And I don't think that they're going to try anything wonky going forward, which, yeah. Go ahead.
I guess my question becomes, is that SKT or is that Faker? So, because we've had different iterations of SKT, and I feel like, yeah, they've lost, but they have lost series before on certain rosters, right?
Sure.
And then obviously, like last year's SKT is very different from this year's SKT.
Correct.
I mean, there's one player remaining.
Well, their identity in general is very different. Like you could argue that when they made certain roster changes to the Bang Wolf one, they kept like a consistent identity in terms of like we're like strong topside focus, but mostly just going to stall out until mid-late game, use vision control to create comeback opportunities in windows like this. So I think the identity of this SKT is very different. And I would say that they haven't necessarily made fundamental changes to how they're playing or how they're viewing the game. And some of the stuff that they've done in the best of ones in this MSI isn't just like, okay, well, they have to be stronger overall or they're losing early game too much. It's stuff like they're making really bad decisions.
Yeah.
Not just in draft, but in terms of how they're playing the early parts of the map, things of that nature. So, like, I think Clid is a really big saving grace. And so for me, it's really interesting because I feel like all the stuff that I praised IG for early on, I think Jankos is kind of prone to. And that's why Jankos is prone to not understanding these early game win conditions as well. So he'll be like on the wrong side of the map, or he'll be doing something a little bit different to what he's supposed to, unless he has like a really straightforward team composition. And so that might be a flaw of doing something that has a less straightforward win condition, like two solo lanes and a strong bot lane or something like this. So I think that's that more than anything might be what Thorin was kind of alluding to when he was saying when they made these unconventional drafts, they looked better, because most of these like quote unquote unconventional drafts had like a straightforward, you have to do this or we lose the game. We would have to make sure Pyke can get a comeback or we lose the game. These types of situations. So I think that's where G2 looked better, and their early game was more scatterbrained when they had like, okay, we have two strong solo lane picks. We have Ryze and Nico, or we have these, and we have to play around one side. I don't really know where I'm supposed to be on the map in the mid to late game as Jankos. I don't really know where I'm supposed to get the advantage in the LeBlanc versus Lysandra matchup as Camille. Like these sorts of things that Jankos has faltered more on. So I think that would be my bigger question mark, but I don't see SKT abusing that well unless they just like straight on do it and need it and try to tower dive Rise at level 2. So yeah.
I like that about G2, like doing best when they have like straightforward comps, because I also feel like even outside of the weird, crazy games, they've picked really, really straightforward stuff. To be honest, it's mostly like a straightforward 1-3-1 composition that they pick with like really obvious win conditions early on. So I do like that. I'd like to say though, when it comes to SKT, I feel like in series when they have looked vulnerable, it's being post Duke and it's being when their top side is vulnerable, and Huni was vulnerable in a similar manner. He has different strengths to him, but in a similar manner to how Khan has looked vulnerable relative to how G2 were deciding to punish that. And I think that this problem continues to exist, obviously, if I'm making the comparison there. So I'm still not too worried, even if the overall series history for SKT is pretty strong. Like, we're a far cry from Marin and we're a far cry from Duke now. I think both Khan and Huni were really abusable points, and when they were up against RNG, for example, that was still a struggle for them, even though RNG were playing in a manner in which Let Me was basically completely left alone. They still had really strong lane setups for their solo lanes, at least at that point when SKT beat them, and that series went to a best of 5, I think, because of that. They were the guys that were doing Galio Shen, for example. And I think in the finals, a large reason that they got 3-0'd was because of the Cuvée-Huni disparity. And I think that there is a disparity topside right now. I think that there wasn't a disparity, for example, versus Griffin, because I actually think, just based on the odd games that I watched and the playoffs, that Sword was actually a huge issue for Griffin. I actually think individualistically is probably the worst player on that team. So I don't think that disparity factored in there.
That's a pretty strong consensus in the community, by the way.
Okay, well, okay.
A lot of people would agree.
So I don't think that was there. Which was the series that they struggled in? Was that Afrika?
Kingzone.
That was.
They still won 3-0, but the games were like, very scrappy games where they even had times where they were mildly behind or whatever. Yes,
and okay, yeah. So I actually think the topside theory kind of holds somewhat. So obviously this is a lot of faith in Wonder, and it's a lot of faith in G2 not just suddenly playing away from him, even if they're inting tempo away when it comes to their mid game setups if they come out ahead. I think all of the tools are in G2's repository to win this, and I do think that versus G2. They do play around Wonder correctly, even if it's just incidentally because of their, I believe, correct read of SKT. So,
okay, LS, where were you going before we derailed it with the whole Faker angle? Like, how are you seeing this matchup?
Well, I just think that SK Telecom plays standard against them, and I think that SK Telecom's standard is stronger than G2 standard. And that's just my take on that, right? The first loss that they suffered from, I think that you can replay a certain freeze frame leading up to the G2 getting the Baron. I think that you can replay that scenario, 100 times, and I don't think that SK Telecom makes the same grievous errors, and SKT.
This is the one where they just catch them, and then it's like right near where the Scuttle is outside the Baron, right?
I think this is the game where SKT gets a bright idea to approach an incoming minion wave with zero obligation to do so, and then Nautilus, I think Mata goes for some sort of an engage, doesn't work out completely, and then the engage is neutralized, and then they try to force the issue even more. Clid gets wrapped up by Xayah feathers, and then Teddy gets caught. He dies. Faker kills someone, but can't continue, and then G2 gets Baron. Right before that moment, even though on paper G2 is ahead with the gold score, the Infernal Drake, etc., I don't think that they're actually really ahead in terms of logistics for map state, team comps, whatever. I'm not so concerned with that loss. I'm also not concerned with the other loss, which is the Pike game, where SKT chain feed a Pike, 6 kills essentially, in a very, very short time span, and they're just hemorrhaging, and then they bleed out. It sounds really simple to just say that I think they win the best of 5.
You don't.
Yeah.
You don't think G2's composition is going to be ahead as the game goes on? Because I feel like
Game 1?
I feel like SKT don't have a really good answer to Rise inside in general.
Hold on.
Is that game 1 or is that game 2?
That's
game 1 was the one where it was the Jace versus Silas top.
Okay, then it's game 1. I mean, yeah, game 1 was Jace versus Silas, but
It was Rise versus Azir mid.
Yeah.
oh
So,
yeah.
You have Jace Elise, Rise, Zaya, Rakan against Ezreal, Nautilus, Silas, Lee Sin, and obviously Azir. So when I said that like logistics or whatnot, I think it is inconceivable to assume that Rise can just go bottom lane and a member from SKT can't respond, and then eventually just rotate match a Baron, and then eventually Rise doesn't have teleport for 6-minute cooldown. I did this in multiple VOD reviews where I went over how realistic it is for Rise to just barrel down a side lane. It usually doesn't start happening until about 33 minutes. There's several champions in VODs that you can find that are able to hold him in front of the bottom tier 3 turret. It's not that hard, and especially not a champion like Azir. Rise just can't get on top of him.
I mean, I think that... Yeah, but Azir also can't like hold him unless he's just straight under a turret, right? And I think that if they're playing their midsection correctly, like Ezreal, Nautilus are kind of safe. But I think that especially if they're going the full AD build, then Zyrakan still will have a stronger midsection overall. So Azir can hold him in a side, but Zyrakan like can hold them at a stronger midsection. So the only question is whether like top jungle 2v2 is strong. So I think if G2 play out the map correctly, like their composition actually outscales properly. But if you're just saying that if they're in a group scenario, then yeah, obviously SKT win in a group scenario.
Yeah. So, like I think from just to add on to what she says before you come onto it, like in the map setup that she's talking about, that's the absolute nightmare scenario for the Silas. That's actually absolute worst case scenario for him, and I think that they'll just naturally win on that way if they have to spend the Azir's resources on the Rise and play around. I assume that would be that was the red top section. Oh yeah, now I remember how the game ended. Holy shit, that was a shit show.
It was the deaths in mid into Baron. So I feel like the sequences is the mid fiasco I think happens around 24 minutes. The Rise threshold where he can begin threatening inhibitor to an extent occurs around 33. So between 25 and 33 there's the window to demand that G2 meet you at Baron. You get Rise's teleport out because he's too weak to keep pushing the turret, and then you repeat the sequence about 90 seconds later, and then they're forced to fight you at Baron. And that's an unfortunate situation. What?
He can't threaten, but I think Jace is far enough ahead that he can.
Jace would be the one threatening. Azir would hold Rise, I agree with you there, and I agree as will not to be safe. But in that scenario, Silas is in the absolute nightmare scenario. So now you have to put resources towards that side. If Jace backs off on that one, and then you just play really hard in the red side jungle, then I think that you trade really, really well if you're G2 in that position.
You don't get midsection control as Ezreal Nautilus versus Zyrakan. I don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't. But
so then I don't see the opening for SKT to threaten Baron if they can't get midsection control.
I don't know either.
Well, this comes with the need for stuff on the screen, right? And it comes with a lot of, I guess, implied knowledge, and it talks a lot. It requires a longer conversation to keep.
I've got a question for this matchup that I'm interested as a layman to see, which is the 2 times G2 played SK Telecom, G2 took triple teleport in these games. And in fact, many of the games at MSI, they're one of the teams that's done it. IG's done it a few times. SK Telecom never takes triple teleport. They never do that. And if you even look at the way those games played out, actually, I feel like that's one of the aspects that's been catching SKT off guard. They think that certain fights can win. They think in certain scenarios they're okay, and then the extra teleport comes in a brush or something, and then they're outnumbered. It's an extra guy there. They forget that the AD carry of the other team can teleport. So will this be a factor in this series?
I think a large part of that is because they had such a high priority on the Azir pick, and they weren't playing with the kind of abuses you want to do with TP and lane in mind, and they definitely weren't playing with the kind of map plays you want to play with TP in mind. I think you just kind of like hit the nail on the head. A huge difference between the way G2IG played the game out and the way SKT looks play the game out. If SKT are holding the map state in a certain way, that they're not looking to just collapse as fast as teams like G2IG, and I think in that you kind of hit the stylistic difference that I think G2 have over them, that I think has helped G2 to be so strong in this meta. So I'd put that as a point in favor of G2, sure. If not necessarily because they're going to take TP, but because of what this indicates about their playstyle as a whole.
Okay. By the way, LS, do you need to go now?
Well, how much longer? I asked for 2 hours. So we're coming up on that. That's why I just didn't know.
Let me think. How about this? What we'll do is just briefly give us some of your thoughts on the other matchup, the IGTL one, since that one's, I'm assuming, the quickest one for you to talk about anyway. And then you can just go and then we'll continue the other part.
Okay.
We'll just do it a 3-man show, mate. So give us your thoughts on that initially.
So for the TLIG, I think it's just a 3-0. I actually can't imagine anyone would predict any differently. I think that TL has looked really weak in the tournament. I think that they actually should have lost to Mr. Buffalo. Assuming Mr. Buffalo... me and Veteran were the only two fucking people tweeting about this, because there were so many people that are like, oh, TL's playing really well. What? What fucking game are we watching?
I mean, but every time, so every time after the first game where they picked like Zoe or Ezreal or anything like, why are you picking? You can't hit anything. Why are you picking this? Just get it off my screen. And then, but there was this when I was completely done. There was this one fight. So there's a challenger jungler called Tinks. And like we got so fed up that at one point there was like a Baron fight where we were just trying to count how many Qs Rise was missing, and Tinks was like so done by the end of that he just like closed it and just went into solo queue. It was so ridiculous. They win that game if they hit skill shot. It's not even like a mechanic.
Yeah.
They just hit skill shots. They win the game. It's so cancer. Holy fuck!
No, not even that. They would have had so many big advantages accrued in the early game, and so
I mean, they already played.
They did too, right? Even in spite of everything that was going wrong. And so people that are telling me that TL's playing well, I'm like, what the fuck game are you watching? Mr. Buffalo was always proactive. They were always the first to make moves, and TL's only fucking things came from them turning stuff on Mr. Buffalo because they missed skill shots. Yes. So that was the whole fucking thing about the series.
Actually, the big defining thing for me about the series and why I'm so absolutely convinced it would be a 3-0 is that the first game, the swap that Buffalo went for is actually really off-tempo, but the way Team Liquid responded to it, literally you could not have a worse response to it than what Team Liquid did. It's like, alright, they're both bad, but Fengfu are still managing to be in a different galaxy to Team Liquid around the map. So they definitely win this series. For sure. And then they just miss everything. It blew my mind. But yeah, obviously IG will shit on Team Liquid. So.
Yeah. Also, I really have to talk about something else. Okay. Kelsey, hopefully you can chime in because you're in NA now. Xsmithy is not good, and I feel really bad saying that because it's a really harsh blanket statement. But he's not. He's just not good. I don't know where this notion comes from. He has insane laners. People talk about when he went to Immortals, or he got off CLG and he started doing really good. His Immortal roster was good on paper, especially relative to NA. You can go back and LCS and look at it. He had a really good roster on Immortals. He had a really bad roster on CLG, as did many teammates. But now on Team Liquid, he has the best ADC in NA. Sven obviously is there too. And then Bang, but he has the best ADC. He has Core JJ on support. He has Impact, who has just been really good in NA historically last couple of years. And even though he gets memed for some stuff lately. And then he has Jensen in mid lane, who many have interchangeably at several points been like, oh, he's better than Bjergsen. Bjergsen's better than him. He's better than Bjergsen, yada, yada, yada. He has these phenoms in these lanes, makes it very easy to play jungle. Very easy.
It's true. Well, very easy to farm jungle.
The style he's playing.
I think
Yes,
that's
that's the key.
He's
right?
Ambition 2.0. He's NA Ambition.
Yes.
That's essentially what it is. I'm
No,
not
it is.
doubting that he's valuable
true.
to the team. I'm not doubting that he's valuable. I'm not doubting that he might have like leadership or that maybe he's
Sure.
helpful to have in the team environment. The same way Ambition was. But you're kidding yourself if you thought Ambition was a top jungler in Korea, even when his team was winning.
Yes.
He wasn't. He wasn't better than Haru. But what he did for his team was arguably a little bit better, but that doesn't make him a good jungler.
Yes.
There's
No,
a
I agree.
distinction there. Yeah. So Xmithy, this tournament though, holy, I
think his idea of how to play jungle, and the biggest thing is that TL's idea of how jungle should be played right now is pretty poor. Like they spend a lot of time just making sure that he's farmed, and there will be games against like lesser teams where he'll be ahead in farm just because their enemy solo lanes can't contest them, right? So that will be like where they put their advantage. They put their advantage on Smithy, but then like that does absolutely nothing for them because jungle XP is fuck all. And so then I don't really understand like where the thought process is, but they can win NA like this, and it's so strange.
The thing is, people laugh, but that's why I kept telling all these boneheads, like, what are you talking about TSM would do? TSM couldn't get past this. TSM played the whole year against this, and they weren't better. Like, come on.
I do think TSM would actually play the current meta out in the way that Team Liquid abjectly refused to do, but I don't think that they would necessarily translate that into more wins than Team Liquid. Yeah.
I gotta say though, I think Doublelift looks very off this MSI. Just from watching the games, I'm not getting the star appeal. That
He hasn't really had any big games in that sense.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, he had a very good. He was the one saving grace for them in one game. That
Yes,
stood
one
out.
of the early games, I think he had like Kaiser or something, and he actually was like doing all right. And then but they lost the game, I
But
believe.
there's been other games where him and Core JJ have given up solo kills or just been out.
I don't think
of
Core
lane
JJ
state.
is the best support in NA right now, but people keep telling me he is, and he won MS.
Hey,
I mean, he's been pretty bad at
Hey,
MSI, I have to say.
God.
He's been much worse at MSI than he was in
He gets
NA.
to play Tom Kench a lot in NA.
Sure.
He gets to play Tom Kench, Braum, and when he doesn't play
Galio,
these champions,
all those,
I think that Tom Kench, Braum in particular, when he doesn't get to play these, I think the skill discrepancy between him and some of the other top NA supports and what they do in terms of like engage and everything else is apparent. Smoothie in particular. So I think that there are things there. I think Doublelift is probably the best AD carry in NA. Yeah. But I think in general, he had like I would say his last international appearances, his last Worlds, his last MSI were better than this overall. Just his individual performances. This hasn't impressed me. So yeah, I would agree to that. I also think this is a meta where it's hard for ADs to be individually impressive, which is why it's so weird to me that everyone thinks that Jackie Love is the best performing player in MSI groups.
We'll get to that. That was definitely on the whiteboard. Don't worry about that one. I've been waiting. No one trusts me. They don't think I know anything about the LPL. So
That's the first I've heard of that, by the way. Like, that blows my mind.
Have you not seen like the tweets and the segments? Like, it's very interesting.
Veteran, if you know anything. If you've what I mean, we'll get to this later, but the quick version is this. It's literally like Reckless from 4 years ago again, mate. If he got the most kills on the scoreboard and in the team fight, his name kept flashing up as getting the kills. He must be the player who carried the game. Like, that really is the logic.
Slightly different.
Yeah, of course.
I would say Jackie Love's playstyle is very not Reckless playstyle, but yeah,
of course.
I can see where
I just mean where the fans are, how they're analysing the game. You know, they're literally just looking at the kill feed basically. But anyway, we'll get to that later. So LS, finish us up before you go. Then do you have any more thought? Like, for example, is there like a player on Team Liquid could pop off and give them a chance to win some games? Is there any hope for this series, or is it just going to be a stomp?
I think it's just a stomp. I don't know if it's G2 versus Origin level, but I don't see a world. I mean, you could probably give me 100-1 odds, and I would still bet on IG. You know, so
but you definitely bet on IG.
No, you know, or I said.
Yeah, he meant the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, I put $1. I lose 100 if I. Yeah, you get what I'm saying.
Okay.
No,
Right, before you go, because we'll get into some of those topics again separately, right? So in your world, I assume for you it's SK Telecom IG in the final, right?
Yeah.
So in such a world, give us just some. Obviously, now we're purely shadow boxing because we can't know what's going to happen. But give us some basic thoughts on what would happen if that final happens. Like IG wins.
I would say IG is favored more days than they're not. I know that Korean players that I talk to, that's not their consensus. They think SKT would be favored.
I have one last question.
For me,
keep going.
Does Khan shit the bed? Because I think that the dynamic of him versus the Shy is really important for the matchup. I think that Faker, probably one of the few mids in the world that won't get lane kingdomed by Rookie 5 games in a row or something. I think that that's really important. Obviously, the Teddy dynamic, because I think he's the best AD in the tournament, is really important. And then Clid versus Ning is obviously exciting. So, and it's also SK Telecom in a best of 5. So it depends, I think, how Khan shows up that day, and then also how their drafts are. I think if their drafts are fine and Khan is normal, I think they can beat IG. But I don't think that's the norm, and so I think IG probably wins. But
okay. Right, one last question.
My opinion changes after.
Before you go, one last question I have, which is one of the parts I do find weird is this whole narrative of like, well, Korea's offered its own little ecosystem and they've developed a game this way. And look, SKT, how can you blame them? They thought this was the best way to play League of Legends. Right? LS, am I wrong here? Hasn't everyone for the last 4 years been talking about how the top LPL teams practice against the top LCK teams? In fact, that was one of the reasons given as to why supposedly everyone knew SKT was going to beat Griffin, was because everyone had played them in scrims and knew the story. Right? If this is all true, then surely SK Telecom, even though to me, if I look at their players on paper, they should be up to them what style they want to play. They've got some very good players. They basically, whatever style they came in this tournament, they really believe that's the most effective style, even against IG and so on, right? They weren't really off on the Galapagos Islands just evolving on their own, were they?
Well, one of the things I'll actually comment on this is LPL teams will scrim even Korean Academy, and obviously I know this firsthand experience. And I'm not talking about last place LPL teams. Top or high end LPL teams will scrim Korea challengers.
If IG was in LCK, they'd get relegated by BBQ Olivers.
No.
Anyway, keep
but
going.
It's
joking, obviously.
So basically, what I'm saying is that top teams can. Yeah, we'd have to do that.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
So, whatchamacallit? So top teams will play teams much weaker than them. Okay. And then I have to wonder, because I know a ton of teams were on break as soon as the season ended. Korean teams just weren't scrimming. But there was a lot of challenger teams still scrimming because the Challengers promotion match thing was going on, but then the Challengers Korea promotion match. So the third league teams are all scrimming. The third league teams are all made up of basically washed up pros or washed up pros becoming coaches and getting solo queue talents and whatnot. And so I have to wonder what teams are still available and what teams are they actually scrimming that are playing in 70, 80, 90 ping on Korea. And does this end up causing them to have a false belief of how to approach the meta coming into the tournament?
There's also there was also Demacia Cup qualifiers, so you can at least scrim. A lot of teams fielded their LDL teams for that, but you could probably at least scrim the LDL team, and then IG was even preparing. Right. There were some EDG, I think, fielded their actual roster, so there were still some top LPL teams scrimming. Yeah. So yeah.
But were they willing to scrim Korea? I guess. Yeah,
I'm not sure
at that point.
If they're willing to scrim Challengers Korea, I don't know why they wouldn't be willing to scrim it. Maybe they would be. Actually, okay. I can see an argument for I can see an argument for SKT not wanting to scrim them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that would be that would be a thing as well. So
right.
Say for a fact that they would scrim them, they could.
Yeah. They probably would scrim SKT.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's pretty much it.
Okay. So LS has left us. He had to go do something. Maybe we'll find out publicly what it was. Who knows? Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll remain a secret forever. So we know what it is. You don't. Ha ha ha. You don't know stuff about the scene. Right. So we'll do a 3-man episode for the rest of it. Now, the interesting thing here is, obviously, as you saw from when we asked LS about IG versus Team Liquid, it's not that interested in a matchup directly, but we can definitely talk about the two teams, and obviously we're hoping IG will go on to the final, and that will be very relevant later in the tournament. So to start off with, let's just get them out the way immediately. Like, generally, what have you thought of Team Liquid in the tournament, Kelsey? Like, we've had a lot of harsh criticism from some of the others. As a team, where have they been worse than expectations? Have they lived up to expectations? How do you start out on this?
I think they did. It's really weird because everyone is praising them for getting out of groups finally, or Doublelift getting out of groups finally. But this feels like kind of like a consolation prize, because I thought Flash Wolves and Fongbu were just going to be bad. Like, I thought that they wouldn't be able to do. This was going to be maybe the worst tournament in the history for wildcard regions in general, just because I just didn't see anything good coming out of Flash Wolves from the play-in, and
Yes.
Fongbu had just like such a skill disparity versus TL that on their individual players that it just seemed unlikely for anything to happen. So it was like, okay, this should be an easy 4th place for TL.
And
fact that
TL looked shit even when they beat Fongbu.
Yeah. And the fact that it wasn't an easy 4th place makes me think that they played below expectations, even though it's like, oh my gosh, NA got out of groups. Yeah, woo! It like, if you're an NA fan, you should be disappointed by this performance, I think.
Okay.
As someone who's working in the NA scene, that's how I feel. Obviously, you're supposed to support the NA representative at the international tournament, because obviously I have an academy team. They couldn't fucking beat Team Liquid, so what am I doing talking shit about them? But yeah, I acknowledge that, but I think that we should like push our players and our teams to do better than that. So
yeah, believe it or not, during this conversation, it's entirely possible Kelsey might actually question a coach's decision who she thinks is a better coach than her. That's also entirely consistent. It's not even any lack of coherence with that ability to have that statement, believe it or not. Doesn't imply you think you're better. Why would it? In fact, more importantly, maybe just think about this if you're a fan of the show. The reason why that would be an entirely irrelevant point to bring up is, if we had to only judge coaches based on the level of academy in NA, well, then we'd have a pretty meaningless conversation, wouldn't we? Like, you have to judge people at the standard they are at. So the idea is these are supposed to be the best coaches. Therefore, even if they have just an okay game, that might be bad. So anyway, right, what about player-wise? Because one player we never really touched on, actually. It's easy to talk about Impact as the most obvious narrative in the tournament because of all the strong top laners. Doublelift is always obviously going to attract the eye, and people are going to say how he did. No one's actually addressed Jensen so far. How did you think he did?
That's a herald.
Anyone. All of them for anyone now. There's only 2 of us here. We've all been on shows a million times.
I don't
Lost
think he
both
played.
sides. Oh, go on.
I don't think he played that badly. I think he was fine. I mean, he wasn't worse than I expected, so there's that. It's pretty good. Like, he struggled in certain matchups that I think he shouldn't have struggled in as much. Like, obviously the 0-4, you're probably going to allude to the Akali Silas situation. So I'll just let you talk about that then.
Outside of what I was literally going to say is that lost both sides of Akali Silas, but otherwise, other than that, I think he was good. I think he's not on the level of Caps. I think he's not on the level of Rookie, and I think he's not on the level of Faker. And the reason behind that can be found in like the way he played out Akali Silas, because just mechanically he played that out poorly, and there are just games where he doesn't seem to understand how the matchups should be played out, even if they're supposed to be strictly advantageous. Like, I don't think he understands that matchup at all, hence losing both sides of it as a pretty critical matchup to know coming into the tournament. Jensen has never been one of these Champion Ocean players, but Nuke Duck and him were basically 1-to-1 for a long time, and NukeDuck has become one of these Champion Ocean players. So I definitely believe it is within Jensen to become this. I think he's in the wrong region to develop in the strong manner that he would need to develop for this, though. Like, Nukeduck put a phenomenal amount of games to get where he is. This guy was legitimately like 2 to 3K games per season really easily on his main accounts. Stuff like this. And if you put that kind of effort into it in North America, it's actually a severely diminished effort given the state of NateDOhDoubleG. So I think that the environment Jensen has chosen to go into has held him back from developing in the way that he definitely could have, and it really shows in the way that he plays out certain matchups on the mechanical level. I just don't think he's being tested the way that he should be tested to understand how these things go. Like, Akali Silas should never go that way. Should never get to a point where Silas is solo killing her on side lane later on because he's just fucking choking and throwing W at really terrible points, either too late or too early.
Okay. Right.
Well,
is there actually anything more to talk about with Team Liquid, or should we just go to IG?
I think there's in defense, I think there was a 2v2 situation. Mid 2v2 was played much better by almost every other team at the tournament. And this is kind of going back to the Smithy point, is that the way that TL went into this tournament thinking jungle should be played was really anachronistic in terms of, like, people will point to, oh, they should be playing around impact and not bot lane. Like, you can play around bot lane. It's still possible. It's a little bit, I think, more difficult just because if your top lane is losing super hard, then you're going to be swapping against tempo if you have an advantage bot lane. But it's still doable. Like, there are still ways to play around bot lane and win, and I think we've seen teams do that in this event. Like, obviously, IG have even had games where they played around bot lane and won. So that's not the issue. The issue is how they're playing jungle. Like, just why are you constantly counter jungle opportunities to get a few creeps when people are getting like 6 plates and 3 kills on their solo lane? That's never going to even out. So just like the way that they came in thinking about jungle as a role was really bad, and it often made it in certain situations where Jensen was like literally 1v2 in a lot of cases in lane. And so I think that there were situations where he ended up worse off. Like, obviously you shouldn't go 0-5 in lane, but
sure,
like, there were situations where he was worse off because of that discrepancy. And I think that maybe one thing that you can say there was an adaptation of turnaround. It wasn't well executed, but in the final game versus G2, it felt like Smithy had more of a mid lane presence. And so maybe that was why, like, G2 thought they could get away with being a bit lazier, Caps running it down, because they weren't expecting that as much.
Sure.
So, like, maybe that's a slight adaptation Team Liquid made, but everything else is more or less kind of whatever.
I think from what you've said, I could predict your answer to this, but I kind of want to know anyway. Do you think that changing the jungler is going to do this, or is this just an inherent problem with their jungle system and maybe even with like the way North America recognizes jungling as a whole?
I don't know if it's a North America spread thing, because I know there are definitely teams in North America that play with their jungler differently. I think that of the top 2 teams in the final, this was kind of like more the predominant thing. But if you look at teams like Echo Fox, teams like even C9, depending, they play a little bit differently with their jungle. So I think that it's fair to say that this was just kind of these are the top 2 teams, so this is what ended up winning out, and they weren't good enough at this other style to prove that it was better. So sure. I think changing out the jungle doesn't necessarily improve that if the jungler is going to play the same way. Like, changing out Smithy for Acadian is definitely not going to do anything. So I get, like, there are criticisms of Smithy on a mechanical level. Like, those are pretty obvious. But I think that in terms of Smithy is very thoughtful about the jungle. And if he's playing this way, then that's probably, like, the way that they as a team have thought that it should be played, and so they're just worried that he can't adapt to playing it differently. Or maybe that's a concern, but I think changing out the jungle now is not going to do anything, obviously. Maybe changing out the jungle future to someone who has hands who can force more skirmishes, yes.
Yes, that's the question I had, because even though if you go back, like, I mean, we're talking like half a decade ago now, yes, Smithy was like a mechanical jungle, blah, 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 whatever, played Lee Sin. That is so long ago, it is ancient history now.
Yeah.
But if you look this year, Like, for me, one of the other changes that people don't seem to address very much, everyone's addressed the whole solo lane angle, the fact that obviously turret plating makes it better, more important to try and get those early advantages. The one angle no one seems to bring up is, like, the era of being like I'm the jungler who just wins every game with my brain only. I don't need to have the mechanic. Like, that doesn't exist. Like, this was the first split where Score looked fucking superhuman as well in Korea. Like, that was the guy who was the best at that style, where it was just about knowing where your opponent is, knowing when to match him, knowing when to not do. Like, that entire style feels like what is, like, invalid at the moment. Like, you can't really get by on that. You know, the old days where it's like, right, you have some people who go the other extreme, like Peanut and fucking Flawless, where they're just like 24/7 aggro, even in the old days, back before when it's now. But that type of like, oh, I'm the more cerebral, like, I'm amazing type guy, like that doesn't feel like that's very relevant at the moment.
I mean, even fucking Clearlove, who used to be the king of that, is adapting to, I'm going to take blue buff and level 2 gank bot now. Like, this is just very... You have to play jungle differently, and I think that the read that TL had on it was bad, and I don't think they have enough time to fix it. But they can make slight alterations to where Caps can't just, like, run it down mid and get solo kills, so that's good. That's promising, but I think that Ning's ability to read the win condition of his team comp is just going to be significantly better than TL's, and he's not going to hesitate to pull the trigger. It's like, oh, we have this, I think it was Silas versus Rise mid, was the SKT game? I can't remember.
I'll double check it for you. The last one we're talking about, yeah.
I know the first game, between Silas versus Rise, where he played Camille. But it was a volatile matchup that basically Rookie wouldn't win that side, but he just like knew he had to level 2 gank for it because that affects both his champion and Rookie. Like there are a lot of situations where he's just making the right call, even if the right call seems like it's bad because it would personally punish him. It's just the right call for what their team needs to do. I think that Ning's like pretty smart about that. They're really smart about if there's a Shen in the game, we're going to force Shen or a Nocturne in the game, that we're going to force them to use their globals on the wrong lane. They would rather use their global on top or something else, but we're going to force them to use a mid. We're going to force them to use it in the jungle. Like, they're really good at thinking about these kinds of concepts, and so I just think that like it's a really bad matchup for TL to learn jungle. So.
Okay. Right, if we put TL to one side then, because it's not even that interesting a matchup to discuss. Like, are there any general thoughts that we didn't discuss on the actual semi-final of IG TL? Is there anything else we didn't say? Any other points you want to make, or should we just talk about IG as a team now?
I think this is another point to bring up, because people talked about how Impact can't, quote unquote, can't play carries. Yes. I think his skill set is more adapted to flanking champions, which are usually tank, but you can flank on things like Vlad, stuff like this anyway. But it's less that and more that TL need to play to bot. So you can take that as, you can read that however you want, but I don't think it's like an Impact specific problem.
I would just put that in the same bucket that I had the Bjergsen in TSM and the Faker in SK Telecom. It seems pretty obvious that everyone knows where their fucking bread is buttered.
Yeah, I think I mean, TL have to play to bot, and
yeah,
double lift, that's double lift, right? Like, he's been that way, so it's not surprising.
I would just like to say, so was UZI, but Forgiven, on the other hand, wanted you to play around topside. I'm just saying.
I mean, the era of RNG that was the best for like a solid year was a 1-3-1 RNG. Okay, I can't get over it. I can't move on. I'm fine. Okay. He played Varus.
Sorry, Kelsey. You saw that World's quarterfinals. That was the only way they ever played. Nothing else ever happened. Welcome to hell.
Okay,
this
that was
League of Legends.
Nowhere near as bad.
No, obviously not.
That was nowhere near as bad as their series against, was it Jingdong or Sino Dragon? I was pretty sure it was Jingdong. But if you watch that series, it's like, okay, that's how Jingdong got to the final. Thank you very much. RNG. You just went. It's like they just took Zatai. I don't think Zatai actually went top lane. Like, he didn't start there. He's just like in bot, and he was just chilling. They didn't have a top side of the map. Like, they just lost top inhibitor at 13 minutes. It's just all of the gold was on UZI. I was like, this is fucking bad. This is so bad, actually. Anyway, hi. That's enough of me ranting about sad things.
While we're briefly on the Forgiven zone. I just want to say, actually, it's pretty cool how highly rated Freddy, Cabo, and Odo were when Forgiven was on their team, actually. I just realised everyone's estimation.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Like, fuck.
Really
I always tell
strange,
people this, Veteran, every time the debate comes up with the plebs of like, haha, Reckless and every other AD carry who won 1 million championships versus Forgiven, I always just say, who the fuck were Forgiven's teammates? Like, go and tell me which one of those are all legends now, top players now, playing it now. Now let's go look at Reckless's career. Oh, it's the fucking Hall of Fame of Europe. My mistake. My bad, guys. And I'll just say this. I've said it a million times, but I'll say it one more time. If you think anyone would ever let fucking Forgiven live down a split like Reckless had when he joined Elements, you are out your fucking mind. They were the champions of Europe.
True.
They had every player was getting called like the best in his role. He joined with a double MVP team, bombed the whole thing, literally crawled back with his tail between his legs, and everyone goes, I'm just going to forget I saw that. Every fucking League of Legends fan in Europe is like those guys in Westworld where they're like, doesn't look like anything to me, because they've just been programmed that they can't ever see any failure. So this actually, funnily enough, since you managed to, you didn't bring him up, but you brought up Forgiven, which brought up Reckless in my mind. So we've now gotten through some sort of fucked up hotchkotch to talking about IG and Jackie, the topic I alluded to before. Here we go. So Kelsey, the basic version to bring it up again is a lot of like the first place I noticed this is. What happens is, I'll give you a very quick version without going too meta-contextual here. In every single team in any esport that's a team game, there's always this phenomenon where the star players of the team are so obvious because it's a top team, and therefore the star players are often sometimes the best in their region or world at that position, and they're the star of the team as well. Like, they're not just a good player, but they're the star of the team. And that's a crucial distinction I always make, because you can be a very, very good player and not be the star of your team. Obviously, you can have super teams. Yeah. So when you have a team like IG, because everyone's talked, if anything, too much almost about Rookie and the Shine, it's always about Rookie and the Shine, now it's about Rookie, the Shining. What happens is there's a type of fan out there who goes, oh, come on, let's give Jackie Love some credit. Why doesn't he get any credit? Now, if that's where they stopped, I'd go, yeah, cool, let's take a day. Let's look at what Jackie Love does. Let's celebrate him for what he's done. But they always do the other. They go, actually, I think Jackie Love is the best player on that. Like, they go the other way. Like, they go to the extreme, the other side, and they don't realise they're not making up for anything. It's just two sets of people not looking at the whole bigger picture. So the real problem here is, like I say, everyone who's a massive Jackie Love fan has no problem saying absolutely fucking zip when he gets straight carried because he's an AD carry and he never got a chance to do anything in a game that they just won at 25 minutes. Everyone's fine with that. It's no problem with that. It's okay for him to sit in the passenger seat watching the Shy sick highlights. Rookie win fucking lane every time. That's all cool. But the day he steps forward in a game where the Shy didn't get ahead in the game's suddenly gone to like 35 minutes. When he then comes into the team fight on a fucking Kaiser that's just been going all the way through the lane. By the way, I'll give him credit. He's a pretty good fucking laner, actually. And when he does get to team fights, he is a very good team fighter. I agree. That's why my analogy, as I gave on Twitter, was he's like the old Reckless who used to play with himself super solo laners, but if he wasn't a pussy. Like, he actually plays the way I would have liked Reckless to have played in those team fights. Then I would have given him the full credit. But the part I don't get is people really do. Like people can't possibly believe it's possible, for example, that like Doublelift could be anywhere comparable to Jack. He can't be. How could he be? Look, one plays for IG, the other's on Team Liquid. It's like one's the star of Team Liquid, the other one, like I said, is in the passenger seat. Like, he can sometimes take the wheel, but he's in the passenger seat. Do you have a different take on it, Kelsey? You've obviously watched a lot more LPL than me.
I mean, I do think that Jackie Love is a top 80 carry in LPL. Like, I do think he is really
I'll
good.
say this, by the way. I think this is the other problem. You can't give someone credit for something they didn't do. Like I say, the games where he doesn't have to do anything or wins, he doesn't get the credit for that. So I'll say this.
Yeah,
if you give, like, let's say you put him in Mystic's spot on World Elite. So there's a team that plays around the AD carry, very good AD carry. I think he could be better than Mystic. Maybe he is a better player. He's a very good player. But the problem is he isn't on one of those teams, is he? He's on this team. So anyway, sorry, that's just a digression.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is like very mechanically skilled, and like the way he kind of learned the role was just basically hinting every solo queue game and pushing his limits, and a lot of really good players are like that, right? Like players like Caps, players like
The Shy.
The Shy, exactly. Leader is fine. All of these players. I mean, I agree that he's good, he's not. People are not going to immediately agree that he's on the same list.
See, Veteran doesn't realise that when it comes to EU mid laners, he is the LS of Europe. Like, that's LS's move. He picks the player and he's like, I'm telling you now, 2 years out, he's going to be super good.
I legit was like following Ning and Ming when they were climbing the fucking Chinese ladder.
Okay.
Like, don't tell me that's a bot lane duo.
All right, we're swinging it all out. We're swinging it.
No, everyone is like this.
Right,
Everyone is like this. LS is just like the most famous one.
Yeah,
And then,
he's
of
just.
course, like,
I always say this. He's just the only one who
literally
actually
every
says it all publicly. Everyone else just keeps those thoughts in the brain or private.
And when Licorice was doing well at Worlds, like literally every NA Twitter analyst was like, "I knew Licorice when
Sure.
in kindergarten," and it's like, okay. Thank God, let's all claim Licorice and his success. Let's go. Okay.
It's actually hilarious. I'll actually go on before.
Yeah, everyone does this, but yeah, obviously LS is the most famous example. I think.
Just go on before I run. Please.
Yeah.
You know how I'm gonna throw.
So the point is that I think that Jackie Love is actually pretty good, and he has like all of the signs of being a superstar. It's just that like this is the era of super teams, I guess, and the meta. Like we talked about how like junglers actually have to be mechanically good now, right? Like this in this meta, because almost every skirmish and every fight on the map is going to involve a jungler. So this actually becomes like a high mechanics role. Like support becomes more valued high mechanics role also for this reason, because support roams matter as well. So like things like this, I think, are pretty obvious that like SKT Khan has a lot of good attributes to him. Like we've shit on him a lot, but Khan is like still a really strong player. Like there are still really good things about Khan. Like obviously Klid is very mechanically skilled. Faker is really good. Like Teddy Marav, that's an insane bot lane. But you look at G2, it's the same fucking thing, right? Wonder, Yankos, Caps, Perks, Mickey X, like all of these players are really huge and insane. And it's weird because people looked at IG and they're like, oh, this is a team carried by the Koreans. So when Jackie Love is actually playing well at the tournament, their brain just like can't compute it and can't understand it, because they thought that he was going to be dog shit for whatever reason. They think it's
the old days where you know, whoever the third carry is like not really a carry, just an average player.
Now this is like somehow recomputed and exacerbated it to the point where he's the best player in the tournament, just because their perception of how he was going to play and how he actually did play is like so different. I think is a really big.
That's a very common narrative for giving MVP to a weird person. Is this person over exceeded expectations, which doesn't mean you're the most valuable players. It's why it's always a weird angle to take.
And that's why I feel like that's kind of what's happening here, which is really weird to me, because if you watch LPL, Jackie Love is obviously like a very good player, and that's why the weird K's argument that Double Lift and Core JJ were one of the top two bot lanes of the tournament was so fucking weird. So I think like it's just strange to me that I don't think he's the best player on his team. No, I think that like it's fair that you give that to anyone else on top side.
He might be like the fourth best player on the team. Ning's pretty good as well, right? It's not even unfair. As Kelsey said, the point there is that if you take that as a diss against Jackie Love, you didn't listen to anything she just said.
Yeah.
That's not a diss. They literally have like among the best in the entire world at those other three roles.
Yeah, and it's like there is a day where Jackie Love has a lot of potential and promise, and there is a day where maybe Jackie Love is remembered as the best player of
maybe he's the Uzi of his team in the future, and he's like
for the span of his career. But right now, he wasn't the best performing player in the tournament. Like he just wasn't.
Yes.
So.
Well, actually, one thing I want to ask you along these lines, though, is I noticed they still do it as well. IG actually does use their bot lane very interesting. This is how in a way, they must think of themselves as a super team. Because when you think of those old years in the past where, every team did tend to have parity in as much as, right, where you have a super stick top laner, oh, my AD carries the start. It's like, right, let's look for the mismatches. Let's see what the matchups are like. Well, IG doesn't make their bot lane. Like, think about King's Own Dragon X last year, where half the reason why Khan looked amazing is he had a very good bot lane, but who was subservient to his win conditions. So obviously that's the dream if you're a carry top laner. Well, when you're on IG, people might think, well, if you got the shy rookie, surely you do the same thing. No, definitely not. Like they still play that bot lane as though they were going to get the jungle attention. They still play up. They still trying to win the lane, right? It's pretty crazy style of play.
Yeah, it's really crazy, and it shows again like in order to play this way and not just int your ass off, you have to have like a really good understanding of what you need for your early game to succeed and what the enemy team also needs for their early game to succeed, so that you can both like play to your win condition and block theirs at the same time. And so they'll play like super aggressive, but they'll have kind of an understanding of, okay, if I play super aggressive with this lane and Ning is on this side, then we'll always have TP advantage. So we can play a bot lane. If we play a bot lane and they try to collapse bot, then we can have double TP mid top, and we can play like that. So we can simultaneously play to all three lanes. It's like fucking hard, right? It's really hard. So what IG do is super impressive in that sense. And in order to pull that off, they do have to have insane players in every role. So yeah.
That's why I don't even think, like, I know they haven't won this tournament yet, which they probably need to, but I don't even think it's like a delegitimized argument to start trying to compare them to the best teams to ever play League of Legends. I will say, I would definitely like to see this team in a completely different meta. I don't know that they are strong, obviously, like they wouldn't be able to do some of these things, but still fucking amazing what they can do across the whole team. And where's the weak spots? It's pretty hard to find them.
I think
It's
even
actually-
like, sorry, at Worlds people were shitting on Baolan, but I think that he's probably the most improved player on the team, right? Like Baolan plays super well, and they have so many compositional styles where they just rely on him getting level 6 and roaming mid, and then they open the map like on that, basically. It's pretty crazy. Like he's really effective on Rakan. His Tahm Kench is really good. Like his Tahm Kench has always been pretty good, so I think even Baolan, a lot of the weaknesses and criticisms of him that people had at Worlds, like he took them to heart, and he's really good now, I think. So
I'd like to agree with what Thorin said about the meta thing, because the World Championships that they won did shift to a solo lane centric meta, and immediately before MSI, the global meta shifted to a solo lane centric meta. So they have actually been insanely lucky towards the end of splits, of the last 2 splits so far. So I do definitely want to see, and if they do perform there, then that means Jackie Love is the real deal in terms of how people are rating for sure. So
yeah, you're right.
yeah, and even in the context of metas that weren't solo lane centric, like IG has had nearly flawless splits.
Well, if you just look at it even logically,
and they played towards bot like really hard to qualify for Worlds.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly basically the point I was going to make. Was the reason it's not like they will be invalidated in another meta. Like they could obviously just do the Korean style where you just give the Shy like one gank, and if he gets slightly ahead, it's like, right, you just enjoy the rest of the game. We're off bot for the rest of the. You could do that absolutely, of course. Just I don't think they would be as effective because obviously like they're like hyper effective right now.
Yeah, I mean you're talking about them being the best team in the world. Like we're not just talking about okay they could take RNG to 5 games when they qualify for Worlds. Sure, they could do that. We're talking about they beat everybody in the world and everybody that beat everybody in the world and become the best. And like that's a different thing. And right now they have a solo centric meta to do that every time. So
okay. Let me think. Oh, I've got a question actually, and this all of these are open for everyone. If I have like a very pointed LPL one, I'll ask Kelsey specifically. But like, another thing about this tournament, like one thing in general, this is a problem in all esports. I don't blame anyone. I have the same problem myself. Is like it is almost impossible to mitigate recency bias. Like even when you mitigate it, it's because you're actively thinking, right, try to downplay a bit of stuff that seems really important in my memory. Like it doesn't really work. It's like it doesn't really. I always think it's better to just admit your biases. But I will say. Because on day one of this tournament, the Shy looked amazing. I do feel like not that many people have commented on the fact, like, he looked like he fucking just chilled out the rest of the tournament. He didn't really have that many crazy games overall. Like, by the end, he was all right. Like, the stars of the show were like fucking Ning, Jackie Love in the games he popped off. Rookie was pretty good, but like, it didn't necessarily pop that much. What do you think on this one? I mean, the Shy was billed as, he was going to shit on all these top players, wreck them all. I will admit sometimes they didn't draft that way, but whatever.
Yeah, I still think that he played pretty well. He played Victor into Nico, which that isn't a really matchup where you just like hard destroy it. It's a matchup where Nico can't do anything, and so it's a nullifying matchup.
It is also worth pointing out, right? Because I guess maybe fans who don't watch LPL won't know this, but it's not like IG themselves. It's not like having Hooney where it's like, right, Hooney's playing, he gets his carry champion, and everyone goes top. Like when they play an LPL, they sometimes also do that, where like the Shy sometimes just takes like the losing side of a matchup and just says, "I'll just do it," right?
Yeah, I mean he just does it and then he wins the matchups. It's whatever. Like that's why they don't really care if people split map against them, because then they can still get more out of a losing matchup than the enemy, and a matchup that should be useless. Like you shouldn't be able to use your Vlad in the early game compared to another team. So it's sometimes he just plays like losing matchups really well and destroys people and nullifies their advantage, and that's it. So
What do you think, Veteran? Because obviously the hype coming in was, like, how does every other top player do against the Chi? And at the moment, I can see he's been a bit quiet.
I mean, you shouldn't expect versus at least Wonder and Khan that he's going to be able to get these kinds of ridiculous performances off. It's like the Faker thing again. You should expect him, if he is the best in the world, to win lane, and he has consistently won lane. Like the last SKT game, he was very far ahead of Khan. Khan managed to make himself useful on the map, but he absolutely won that lane. I don't think anyone can question that, and he played it very well. You can't expect the fucking Riven montage to appear at this. That's not going to happen. That's not how these guys are going to win the game. They're going to win out their lane. They're going to play out the matchup properly. I think we're at the point where international level teams, the matchups will kind of play out as you would expect them to, and where people like the Chi become a big X factor is actually more or less going to be in the mid game when we get to the split push phase of the game, where we really see how creative they can be about setting up these picks on their opposing laner sometimes, or how they could potentially react to a 1v2 scenario if they opt to get into it. Like, we'll see things about these champions that no one else can see but these guys. But I think it's in the mid game where we're going to see that, not necessarily the early game. Overall, Chi has looked like the best top player in the tournament. Wonder has looked like the only guy that can contest him. I don't think anyone on any other team can do so.
Sure.
So this is one reason why I would be more worried about G2 going up against IG than anyone else, because a lot of it will then come down to the draft, and the last time that it was going to come down to the draft versus IG in the best of series, they really did the opposite of what they should do. But hopefully they've learned from that. The read that they had on SKT also really impresses me for the prospects of how they will read IG. I think they're more likely to read teams correctly now.
I think that like, even referring to the SKT game, like, I wouldn't necessarily. So the thing that makes the Chi special for me is actually that he does kind of change that, because top level players, when they'll play out the match correctly and the matchups will go right, but then I don't think Silas should be like destroying Kennen as hard as he was, like stuff like that. Like, it's subtle, but it's he's winning way harder than he should, or he's winning matchups where he shouldn't. And I actually think that that's where the Chi shines. I do think he's mechanically good, and I do think he sees opportunities in the mid game that other top laners don't see, but I also do think that he kind of upends what you get out of lane matchups, and I still think that that's true. I don't think that. So the thing that kind of bugs me is everyone goes back to that play versus G2 where he gets the Aatrox Q on everyone, or whatever else. It's like, that play was fucking useless. That play didn't do anything. IG got the dragon and they were leaving to reset and set up. Like, they had already started winning the game after G2 fucked up mid game. That play didn't do anything. It just looked cool. It just was cool. Yes. So, like, the big impact plays...
It's just health bar porn. That's all it was.
Yeah, that's all it was.
That's what I call it.
Like, flashing health bar porn. So the big things that actually have huge impacts on the game that he does are more subtle than that. So,
yeah. That's actually one of the things I've got to say. This is just a mild bit of shade I'm just going to throw at the game League of Legends. That is one of the things about League of Legends that is whack. If in Counter-Strike I show you an amazing action veteran, it's not about the kill, it's about, you can see with the crosshair, you're like, what a sick headshot that was, like, what a great decision. The problem is, people do literally scream out loud and get excited by a red bar going from like 80% to 20%. It doesn't matter the context of what happened. In their brain, they go, oh my god, look at that, look at the health bar. It's like, this is such a whack. When that's the excitement, is the red bar going down. Like, I don't know, mate. I don't know about that. That's questionable, how exciting that really is. Like, don't worry, I'm a pleb as well. I do it as well. But there's a moment I take myself out and go, what the fuck am I doing with my life? What is this?
It's because actions in FPS games are made in such a smaller moment than anything else, because the amount of champions in the game that can one-shot, every champion in the game that can one-shot basically has zero fucking counterplay to it. But the actions that you make in FPS games are so fine. Like, there's such little room to get these specific actions wrong, and there's such a tiny moment in which to do it, that the amount of relative skill becomes very obvious for when you make that. And also you get like a much more instant doping rush from watching this towards the next play, whereas with the League of Legends one, you kind of watch it unfold gradually. You kind of watch the play unfold gradually, and then maybe it ends on like a really specific point where you can see that took a lot of skill. level. But in FPS, basically almost every single decision you make is made within such a fine-tuned moment that if you aren't at that level, you're not going to be at that level in like a couple of seconds in one of your games, you know? Whereas you can tell yourself that you could do a lot of these things leading up to the final thing in League of Legends. Like, the consistency for which you have to play in an FPS game, the consistency of these fine moments that you'd have to do to be a good player in an FPS game makes the skill discrepancy so much more obvious than in any MOBA possibly could be. You know?
It's like if you had 1,000 chances to succeed or fail, and you had to do one or the other. You had to succeed or you had to fail, as opposed to leagues. Like, you might have like 50 chances, and some of them, if you just do it 60% right, they won't wreck you anyway. You know, like
Yes.
It's not that big. I get what you mean on that one. Okay, right. In terms of IG overall, what about this then, Veteran? I'm just going to do this. For a second, I'll play the role of the pleb fan, right? So even though I don't agree with this premise, people notice that, as you did with Xmithy, and as, to be fair, in Europe you've done with Broxer, you are someone who is skeptical when a player just farms in the jungle mainly, and then has like god tier solo laners, and hence anyone who's played jungle just knows like, well, what the fuck did you expect? Like, what was he supposed to just lose the game from that? Like, I mean, I don't really know what you were hoping for, but in contrast to that, how would you contrast Ning? Because he obviously has 6 solo laners himself, but I would say stylistically it's quite a difference, right? So how is he different from these other players who maybe they're propped up by their solos, as it were?
I would... okay, so I think that the success of the Shy is tied very intrinsically to Ning. I would say that I'd agree with Kelsey's assertion that he understands the team's win conditions early on more often than not. I think a huge thing about IG's jungling system, though, is that when they have stuff like the Silas, they will always go for a map split relative to their objective almost every time, which is something that I don't think I will ever see a North American team do on any sort of consistent basis. I think the jungle system IG have in mind is like is very tightly focused for a meta like this, where you would just be looking to tell Kaiser Galio, just like, I know you're a Galio, but you're going to be useless for a while, and we're going to play really hard towards top side this game, or something like this. I think Ning is very willing to do stuff like that. I think he always looks to get tempo in his jungle matchup relative to his win condition early on in a way that Xmithy never will. And I don't think he goes for these, what LS would say would be like a high variance play, unless it is around a lane where his laner can always pick up the scraps and stuff like this. Like, he understands that you are much more sacrificial in jungle for your own levels, your own goal, your own economy, compared to how he used to be. Like, that's clearly the big difference between him and Xmithy. I don't think Broxer's big thing is that he farms a lot. I think Broxer also is really sacrificial, but I think he's sacrificial in a really unbeneficial way to his team relative to a lot of other junglers in Europe. Just wanted to correct that characterization. I don't necessarily think he AFK farms.
Sure. I will point out as well, by the way, just for people who get this terminology wrong all the time, just because of players high risk, high reward doesn't automatically make it high variance. Like, oftentimes you use the term variance when you're talking about like an underdog trying to win against someone he shouldn't be able to win against. Well, the point there is an underdog would do a high variance move, like take a high risk, medium to low reward move, because he's just trying to do anything to win. Like, that's very different from like a move that's just, as I say, like, there's a lot of risk, but you see when it works out, Ning fucking wrecks the whole map. Like, it's not like he had a 10% chance of these moves working.
I think he trusts the Shy a lot. Like, I think there's a lot of trust on this team. This seems like a really nothing statement to make, but I feel like there's a lot of trust between these players when they go for these kinds of plays. And sometimes they look really inty, like in the SKT series, but there's a lot of trust between these players.
Oh, I would say for both G2 and IG, one thing you can't take away from them is like the balls they have to go for some of these players in an instant where you can't think and have a group decision and like, you have to all just instantly agree without hesitation. We're going to do this. Like, that's fucking insanely hard to put together a team of people who personnel wise could do that, and then B, even have the coaching staff allow that.
Yeah, I agree.
In fact, I actually think as an abstract meta point, I even think that's where Koreans are going to struggle if we keep in these kinds of metas. Because their whole system That's why I like that term people use, the idea of it's the control system. I would just describe it like this. Koreans believe in systems-orientated play. They believe that what you should do is there should be a logical flow chart, and everyone, it's very important, everyone understands at every point of the flow chart where we are and as a group what decision we're making next. Now, G2 and IG are doing that. They're just doing it in a split second with they're just doing it. And so as a result, like, there's a lot more, like, I always give the contrast like this, Veteran.
Yep.
If you look at American sports, they have made every American sport like this, systemized, so that you can coach a guy individually on one small thing he's doing. You can show him a stat relative to a teammate, an opponent that does this, and you can say, I coach you like this. If you look at how they coach European sports, it is a lot more like, here are tendencies, here's a basic flow, and then within that, a genius player decides what he does, and Messi decides what the fuck he does in the game. You know, like, the coach doesn't tell him each specific move and micro him. So I think Koreans, if they stay in this sort of meta, that's just not their bag. Like, even when, like you saw in these games in this group stage, even if they get into a scenario where they get a slight lead, they're looking for, like, right, how do we, like, reset the game now and then go back to what the state was before and just keep our lead? So it's like, that's not the way the game is now. Like, the question now is, how do you parlay this lead into a bigger lead, right?
Sure. So I said this on Listen Loco. I think there is a huge difference between the Korean system and the system that China and Europe are using, and I think the big difference there, like, I get what you're saying about that it's so systematic and stuff. I think what you're seeing is that they don't play for lanes, they play for jungle, and they play for advantages for their jungler. So if they have, like, a pressure lane, they don't think, okay, let's fucking dive this shit repeatedly. Come on, rookie. Like, you can get up here as well. Like, everyone pile in on this shit. They think, okay, now not Ning, but, like, say Clid can now get certain advantages in the jungle. He can get a couple of camps up. He can maybe free quadrants on this side. But ever since rubber banding came into the game, that's become a less and less reliable way of playing out the game. The advantage you accrue in that manner has mattered a lot less and a lot less. Every time you clear this, you rubber band the camps again, and you're never going to 4-quadrant them. No matter how fucking good you are never going to 4-quadrant it, especially not at this level. So I think playing that kind of system of early game, which is how I perceive was the big difference between how Korea understood the game and how everyone else understood the game, rather than a more sacrificial system, like the way that G2 and IG are playing now. I think that's what really hurt Korea, and I think imitating this is what hurts NA. Because the first Team Liquid G2 game, for example, I think Jankos hard out jungled xSmithy. I think Jankos played both to his win condition and to xSmithy's win condition better than xSmithy could at all. But xSmithy had, like, double Jankos' farm, but he had fuck all XP lead, and Jankos was fully ahead on the map, because this kind of thing doesn't fucking matter right now. It doesn't. And I think if NA wanted to be mini Korea and they imitated this part from them, I think that's a huge reason why we have so many critics of xSmithy, and I think this is a reason why Korea has progressively looked worse and worse, not just since the green smite thing, but I think the rubber banding thing hurt them a lot more than a lot of people seem to realize. And I wish I'd gotten LS's opinion on this, actually, because he
that
had
would
a
have been
big
fun
deal
to
about
do,
rubber
sure.
banding way back, but I forgot about this. So, yeah.
It's all right. Kelsey, do you have any thoughts on this more, like, meta discussion?
You're muted.
I mean, yeah, that's what I was alluding to, though, is that, like, the jungling leads don't matter. Like, that's kind of what we all sort of agreed to, is that the XP-based leads don't really matter. And so playing for plates, playing for kill gold, playing for even, like, it's really dumb, but if you go mid and you gank a lane, you're probably soaking more XP from the couple minions that happen to die relative to the time that you're taking.
So it's actually incentivized to do a failed gank
compared to like farming your fucking wolves. And also, like, if your gank isn't gonna go well, so let's say that the enemy jungler comes to and ganks your mid laner, and your mid laner is at like 10% health. It's like, oh, I should go help him.
Yes,
you're not really going to help him. You're going to clean up the minions that will be left over because he's dead. Sure. Already. So, like, stuff like this, I think, like, you just get more out of being in the lane in general than getting camps. Like, I'm really into the whole kind of, oh, if I path here and I get this, then, like, he won't be able to take this camp. Like, that's, like, the jungle pathing that I find really interesting, but it's just not
doesn't exist at the moment, right?
Yeah,
Basically.
like it's relative to, because if you do all of that, and let's say you do like 3 quadrant them, then like they still just, their only play left is ganking your top laner, and if that succeeds, then you just wasted your time.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
Okay.
Do you agree though that like Korea's kind of always gone for that sort of like style that isn't really so good anymore, but like maybe just because they weren't so good at it, like Chinese teams and European teams were always playing a far more like aggressive, more self-sacrificing style of jungle.
in general, in the past, or
Yeah, like historically, I think this may
Uh,
have been an issue for why
I
Korea
think
hasn't adapted to current style so well.
I think I wouldn't say China has. I would say that Chinese jungling has always been a mix. Like you would have
Okay.
your Clear Loves and your Condis who are way more, I'm gonna fucking 3-buff you kind of stuff, and then you have your MLXGs who hasn't done his Krugs camps and it's 10 minutes into the game, and Krugs is the most high value XP camp, and this is 2 seasons ago, by the way. So yeah, I think there's always been kind of a mix in China. Obviously, Ning is way more of the MLXG style jungler.
Yeah.
But he actually has a brain.
Well, there we go.
But you see like junglers like Condi struggling a bit, and then Clear Love adapting. Like I mentioned, he would do, I'm gonna take my blue buff and level 2 gank bot. Like that's so weird because blue buff isn't even that useful for ganking, and then your entire red topside is gone, but he just doesn't care because the level 2 gank worked and iBoy got the kill. So yeah.
Will also be unexpected for exactly that reason. So it has a counterintuitive reason as to why it would work, in theory.
Yeah.
Keyword in theory, obviously. What about right? I obviously I asked Ellis in that one. Right? You two are both predicting G2 to beat SKT, right?
I am, yeah.
Are you, Kelsey?
I think G2 will, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So then, if we shadow box IG versus G2 as the potential final, right? A question I have is, in line with what we've just talked about now, is it not a concern for you, Veteran, as to how Jankos will actually affect a potential final against IG? Surely he'll be a guy with a lot of pressure on him.
He has had some... Okay. I don't think Jankos was the problem the last time they played IG. I think Ning played a lot better than he had before in the tournament, but I don't think Jankos was a huge problem the last time that they played against IG, and I think Jankos has had some really good performances in this tournament. I am aware that he has had some poor ones as well, but the last time that I bet on the team adapting around their weaknesses, it was Fnatic, and it didn't work out. But I think that we have seen the version of Jankos that is required to beat IG. So in that sense, I know that he definitely can show up, and I know that this definitely can not be a problem for them. And it may only be happening on certain comps right now, but then they just need to have more of those kinds of compositions, and I do trust in them to have enough of them coming into the game. I do think he is a very intelligent jungler. I don't think the pressure thing matters anymore. I think we've had more than enough games from him at a really high level against really strong teams that we can give up on this whole like idea that he will choke under pressure now. Like I think he's grown past that. We can move on from those kinds of memes. I think if I'm worried about anyone coming into this, it's going to be Perks. I think the Sven syndrome was really real towards the end. What the fuck was that? Was really real towards the end. And I think that him and Mickey X were going for really strange trades in lane relative to how Jankos was playing, and that wasn't on Jankos. And even unnecessary in some circumstances. So I'm more worried about them. But at the same time, the version of Perks that we saw really early on in this tournament is the version that needs to show up to face IG. So if this is because they haven't been able to scrim during the tournament itself, then sure, then they'll refresh that now, and I think we'll see a different version of them coming into the finals, because it's just one day between. Like it's literally we have the semis tomorrow, and we have the finals the day after. So I think they'll be refreshed for that, and I think they can win. Like the versions of them that need to exist for them to beat IG have existed. So yeah.
Isn't it one semi tomorrow and the other semi the next day, or am I wrong?
I think you could be right. I think it's one day and then one the next. Let me look.
So I'm pretty sure it's one Friday and then one Saturday and then the final on Sunday.
But I've broken my mouse, man. This is so...
Yeah, it's SKT G2 on Saturday, so they literally they have no break if they beat SKT to prepare for IG.
Yeah,
So,
but I think that might be beneficial if they aren't scrimming during these periods. I think that could be beneficial.
yeah. So I think that G2's fun, even as much as we've ragged on G2's late game in this episode, like
That
their
won't matter.
fundamental understanding of their basic fundamentals mid and late game versus IGs are better. That's just the way it is. It's just, I don't know. Like the fact that their flaws cause them to opt into scenarios where they're grouped and are skirmishing, like theoretically,
Okay, Kelsey,
G2
let me
best.
ask you something.
Mhm.
Because one things I think people still don't understand is when you made that comment, you said it on Listen Local first, that to you,
Yeah.
G2 was the team that was playing like the most correctly, as it were, like the most fundamentally sound for this meta, the exact way League of Legends, right? What is the difference between them and IG in that respect? How do you contrast that?
So IG, I think, have really good understanding of early game win conditions, and their fundamentals there are really good. But like IG, I don't know. They throw like some players at some lanes, and they don't actually bother to set up vision for anything that they're doing in the mid to late game. They just think, okay, if a bunch of people will come, we'll outplay them. We're gonna use our TPs to group.
They basically don't decision make
waves
when they fight, right? They just, it's like that old quote, like they've never met a fight they don't like. They just, every fight, so we're going in.
Whereas
Everyone is.
Whereas G2, I think, are a little bit more thoughtful. It's like, okay, I think their problem with how they're setting up is basically going to be a disagreement on how they get vision with their top laner when their top laner is ahead. But that's like a problem where they're thinking like more strategically than I think IG are. So it's even though that's the case, I just think that like their flaws and where they're going to mess up, like the small ways in which G2 are going to mess up, are going to opt into things that IG wants to do, which is to skirmish around Baron. So I've basically been distinguishing teams between like Rise teams and Silas teams. Like IG, Silas teams want to skirmish because at level 16, they want to skirmish and team fight. At level 16, he can take an ult like every 5 seconds or whatever and throw it out there, whatever. Whereas Rise teams want to like 1-3-1, they want to split the map, they want to use the sideline pressure to get control of major objectives. G2 should be a Rise team, but they opt way too much into like playing Silas style with Rise, like that kind of stuff. Whereas I feel like IG understand that they're a Silas team, they understand that they're going to pick Silas, they're going to play skirmishes out, they're going to team fight, they're going to clobber you with their double TP. And they're going to go home. Like, everyone was memeing the Ivern and Silas thing, but Ivern and Silas is such an insane combination. If you have Silas in the mid lane, then Ivern puts on a shield, Silas can actually just, like, 1v3 with the shield. The Ivern shield. Like, it's this strong, and the root and everything else. Like, Ivern doesn't do a whole lot, and then you add Daisy at level 6, and you don't want to teamfight that. It's so hard. So, I think that like IG just kind of understand their identity really well, and I wouldn't say that they play good League of Legends fundamentals, but they can. G2's weaknesses.
They have better players, though, right?
Yeah, I mean,
helps
they
to have
have better players. Like
you can brute force a lot.
They'll probably get an advantage early, and then G2 will opt into like their mistakes that they make in fundamentals will allow them to play into IG continuing to snowball. So that's why I think IG will.
Yes. Yeah. What do you think, Veteran? Because I have a similar. Obviously, I didn't give it as eloquently as that. I didn't know half the shit she was saying, but I kind of my sentiment is similar. My sentiment is similar, Veteran, which is basically this. My problem with G2 against IG is that like half the shit that G2 is going to do is exactly what IG wants an opponent to do against them. So, like, how do you beat that? You know, like one of the fundamental coaching concepts when you play against a team is if you do not actually know that you are better than them, you want to give them what they don't want. You want to find a weakness and force it. So you can't. I don't really know how G2 does it because they don't really do that at the moment.
I feel like their problem right now is that because they have gotten ahead versus IG. Like, I feel like their
Sure.
problem is the immediate setup that.
And people have done that in the tournament as well.
After
Yeah,
they
people have gone
are ahead. Yeah, but they're I feel like their issue is so simple to solve. Like, that's the problem. I feel like it's so fucking simple to just point at and say, this is the system by which we play from this kind of position from now on, and it's a relatively common position. And I feel like I feel like they're a conversation away from being a team that wouldn't just get the lead versus IG, but close it out versus IG. Because we also have to bear in mind, yeah, she's right in the idea that they are a Rise team that end up playing like they're a Silas team, but they're also a Rise team that at some point, including versus IG, have found the windows in their map setup to do stuff. Like, if they just recalled off of the bot inhibitor thing and taken Baron off that, I know that they can close the game out from that. After the first game versus SK Telecom, they started playing 2 lanes of their Baron very, very consistently. So I put that down to like an initial day issue with them. I genuinely believe that they are like a conversation away from being a team that can actually beat IG, like pretty fucking handily, like 3-1 handily.
I still give, even though you have the group stage scores like they are, where it was IGG 2-0ing G2 and SKT going 1-1 with IG, I still think that G2 have like the best shot at beating IG relative to SKT, just because I still think the best way to beat IG is to go through their top side 2v2.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the best way to consistently beat them.
Mm.
And if you can pull that off, then that's good. So G2 in my mind still has like a decent shot from there, but I just think, and then if they play out correctly after that, then they can win. But I don't know, I just don't see them doing it like 3 games. So I think that IG will win.
What about this though, Veteran? Obviously, if you go player for player down the lineup, yeah, there is going to be a mismatch between Jackie Love and Perks, at least from what we've seen. Obviously, Perks is brand new to his role. He's still in his first split of playing this role. It makes sense. But what about the argument that there's probably going to be no late game in any of these games if they play? Even if they play all 5 games, it's probably going to be a massive early advantage for someone, right?
Yes, but when that has been G2, they've thrown it. So that's why I'm saying that they're like a conversation away from closing this out. I agree. I don't think any game goes to the late game in this series. I don't think this is how it's going to go. And I think that I think that G2 are the team that can, as Kelsey say, actually match their top side. Like, they're the only players in this tournament that can actually match their top side. And I don't think we're at a level where, so long as they get the winning matchups, that it won't be a winning lane. You know, like I don't think the Shy is going to pull out some insane clutch thing. I think then it will come down to Jankos versus Ning. And I think if it's a really obvious set of objectives in the early game, he ticks all the boxes very, very, very well, and he can beat Ning in those scenarios. So
okay. Kelsey, how would you contrast Rookie and Caps? Because I know that you're someone actually who, as in all things, is you tend to be the calming balm that is applied to soothe an otherwise raging fucking rash of people going over the top about players. I notice even in the past, you've been one of the people who doesn't like just say, Rookie has been the best mid laner in the world for the last 4 years and he just didn't get to internet. You know, like you have a more reasonable... So what do you think of... How do you contrast these two players who obviously in their own way can be very overrated at times?
Knight's been
despite
the best
being
player
amazing
in the world for the past 2 years.
He has, hasn't he? Yeah, secretly, we all knew it. No, yeah, come on.
I think, I mean, I think Rookie is just better than Caps, honestly. Like, I do think Caps is good, don't get me wrong, but I think Rookie is better than him.
Is Caps overrated at the moment, like in this lineup?
I don't know. I don't think he's the best mid laner on his team, but I might be unique in that.
What do you think, Veteran?
I think Caps has gotten over his issues that he did have about. He was choking every time he faced against players like Rookie.
I'm not convinced that he was choking, because it wasn't just Rookie. It was Scout. It was like, I don't even think he performed that well against Jensen at Worlds. So
I think he performed really well against Jensen. I think he played the matchups out in a way that I think he played. Wait, I'm pretty sure he played like literally the same matchups played out against.
You know the problem you guys all have is that for fucking Veteran, Kelsey, and LS to have a debate, they would need to be in an auditorium with 3 stages that all face each other with separate projection units, and they all have games lined up, and then they all go, yeah, but what about this? Slide 7, and then they press play and then think. See, they would be on the one hand, you would get to the bottom of it finally, Veteran, but on the other hand, I don't know who would watch this. Like, it would be the most pedantic argument possible, basically. I mean, you would actually see where it went, but I don't know.
Get to the truth of it.
You would.
You can go to Loco Doco if you want, but here you get the fucking truth.
The problem is, though, Veteran,
here we don't lie for viewership, okay?
This is the reason why. I'll tell you
for viewership.
I'll tell you the reason why. On the one hand, LS does fuck up by saying those things that, as we agreed upon earlier, a lot of analysts all have their own wacky ideas. They just don't always say them publicly, you know. On the one hand, I agree he does actually benefit in his like branding from that. That is the way he's built his persona. Some people fuck with it, some don't, but it definitely gets some attention, makes him interesting. But the one area he has fucked up with in that respect is even if you could explain it amazingly so that plebs could understand, they wouldn't. Like, I'll just tell you a very quick concept here, Ben, we'll wrap up the show, which is sometimes when I'm doing Listen Local, I normally don't ever look at Twitch chat on any show I do because I don't give a fuck what they think. Like, why would they have a part in the show? Why would they get to influence? They're just random plebs watching through a window while we're doing something inside the room. So, but when I do the 2-man episodes with him sometimes I'll have it up just to double check that, like, you know, I didn't forget to unmute myself or like everything's going fine, etc. But I don't read the chat. But when I was doing this last episode, I had it up like that, and I was talking, like I was going, and then when I talked about perks, and I mentioned that I thought he was pretty underwhelming in this tournament, wasn't that good. I'm not joking, Veteran. When you hear this, you will realise what fans are like. The entire chat was like everyone saying I'm wrong, and that Perks' laning stats are some of the best in the tournament, and that actually he was like really good. So it's like, I just literally closed the box, and I was like, this is a waste of time to even have influencing my brain. Like, even if you could explain to some people, that's the problem with advanced concepts. Where LS was correct, basically, I'll very quickly make this point, is certain concepts you can only understand when you've built up the concepts that prop it up. Like, you have to understand 2 or 3 concepts that build into that concept. It's the same reason why almost every fucking profound statement in history that's a great quote is very simple. Like, it means nothing, though. Like, if I say, like, oh, we are all one, therefore we should all work together. Like, well, we're not literally one, but on some profound level we are, you know, as much as we're a species. You know, like, you have to understand all those other concepts to get why it's so simple. That's the point. It's like a fucking macro for better concepts. So anyway, that's just all to one side. That's all a separate issue. Do we have any final point before we close? Run out of time. Is there anything left that we need to say about this, Veteran?
Caps has gotten over his choking issues, so I think...
Don't know about that. I'll wait and see on that one, personally.
He performed really well the last time he was against Rookie, and they just...
I want to believe. Don't get me wrong. I want to believe Veteran, but the problem is I don't actually have to, and I haven't staked my personal reputation on it. So I can say, I'll just go Rookie on this one. I'm going to side with I'm going to go by the numbers, take the high percentage.
I got LS, Kelsey, and me here to say what you fucks are doing wrong. So please watch this fucking video. If you're here, you watched it. Thank you. For the love of God, just do everything that we said. You'll win.
Oh, what about this though, Kelsey? If G2 was to win, if G2 did win the final, who would be the player you think would have to have like the best performance on their team? Who's like the guy who could allow them to win?
Wonder, probably.
Who do you think, Veteran?
I mean, Wonder, yeah. I mean, Wonder's the big factor that needs to show up here for them to win it. Even more so, because a lot of the time when it comes to mid, you are mostly just have 2 people that are mitigating the other's ability to vote. It's very rarely now that you have these matchups. Now that we have like those kind of holy trinity matchups of like Rise, of Zoe, of all this kind of stuff, it's very rare that you're going to see a mid laner that is just perpetually roaming because he has such a hard winning matchup right now. Like, it's very much a neutralizing factor. So I think it's going to become majority down to how the top lane and the top 2v2 plays out. I'll say Yanko's not stepping up, but becoming a lot more consistent in how we know he can play. That will be like a ridiculously big factor.
Okay. I think we'll just leave it there. As I said, Kelsey did wake up at 6 a.m. or earlier to do this show, so take that into consideration before you flame. Just leave it on that note. This video was kindly supported by Wendelful, Butt Pounder 420, Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, JDubs, Chi Mao, Daniel Olivar, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks go out to Jerky's Minion, weixz, don't know how to say that's like a Chinese name, and Max Laine. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? It's going to be a big feature in the next few months for me. Well, my Patreon, that's a feature. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you like teasers for my upcoming content? Find out who the next guests are. Maybe you want to take part in that monthly donator discussion with me. Well, if you want any of the above perks, put your money where your mouth is. Support me via the Patreon link below and join the Scrilluminati today.